Hey guys, imagine this. You're huddled in a freezing cave, starving, with a pack of wild wolves circling outside, their eyes glowing like demons in the night. But instead of ripping you apart, one decides to share your scraps. And boom, that's how man's best friend was born. Or was it? Buckle up. Because the real story of how wolves became dogs is a twisted tale of survival, betrayal, and accidental friendship that nobody saw coming. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Picture the scene. It's 30,000 BCE and the world is a frozen hellscape. The Ice Age isn't some cozy Disney movie with talking mammoths. It's a brutal, unrelenting nightmare where every day is a lottery ticket for death. Humans, our scrappy ancestors, are barely scraping by. We're not the apex predators we like to pretend we are today. No, we're just clever apes with sticks and stones, dodging saber-toothed tigers, dodging starvation, dodging each other in tribal squabbles that make modern politics look like a playground spat. And wolves? Oh, they're the real kings of this frozen wasteland. Sleek, ferocious packs that could take down a mammoth if they felt like it, or settle for whatever unfortunate soul wandered too far from the fire. But here's the irony. In this dog-eat-dog world, pun absolutely intended, these two species, humans and wolves, are about to embark on the most absurd partnership in evolutionary history. It's not love at first sight. It's more like a bad blind date where both parties show up desperate and end up stuck together because the alternative is dying alone. Mutual evolution? Ha, more like mutual desperation. We didn't domesticate wolves. They tolerated us because we were the walking trash heaps of the Paleolithic era. Let's rewind a bit. Back then, the planet is gripped by the last glacial maximum. Glaciers stretch like giant icy fingers across Europe, Asia, and North America. Sea levels are low, exposing land bridges that let our ancestors migrate like lost tourists without a map. Homo sapiens, fresh out of Africa maybe 70,000 years ago, are now spreading like a virus across Eurasia. We're hunter-gatherers, emphasis on the gather, because hunting big game is a suicide mission without backup. Enter the gray wolf, Canis lupus. These guys have been around for hundreds of thousands of years, evolving from earlier carnivores into the ultimate pack hunters. They're social, hierarchical, with alphas leading the charge. Sound familiar? Yeah, we're not so different. Wolves live in family units, communicate with howls that echo like ghostly warnings across the tundra, and they're opportunistic feeders. They'll hunt elk, bison, even reindeer if they're lucky, but they're not above scavenging. And scavenging, my friends, is where the absurdity begins. Humans, being the messy creatures we are, leave behind a trail of garbage wherever we go. Even in the Stone Age, our campsites are littered with bones, scraps of hide, half-eaten carcasses that we couldn't finish, because, let's face it, portion control wasn't a thing when famine was your constant companion. Wolves sniffing around the edges of these camps start to realize, hey, these hairless weirdos throw away perfectly good food. Why risk my neck chasing a woolly rhino when I can just loiter here and pick up the leftovers? But it's not that simple. Approaching a human camp is like playing Russian roulette with spears. Our ancestors aren't cuddly pet lovers. They're survivors who've learned that anything with teeth is a threat. So, the first wolves to hang around humans? They're the bold ones, the outliers, the ones with a genetic quirk that makes them less afraid, more tolerant of our screaming, fire-wielding chaos. Natural selection at its finest, or most ridiculous. The scaredy-cat wolves bolt and starve. The chill ones get free meals and live to breed. Now, let's add a layer of historical absurdity. Imagine you're a Paleolithic human named, say, Gronk. Yeah, I'm giving them names because anonymity in history is boring. Gronk's day starts at dawn, if he survives the night without freezing solid. He wakes up in a cave that smells like unwashed bodies and smoke, because fire is the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. Breakfast? Whatever berries aren't poisonous or whatever small game he trapped yesterday. But big hunts? Those are community events full of ritual and risk. Gronk and his tribe track a herd of aurochs, massive, horned beasts that could stomp you into paste. They use atlatls, those spear throwers that give a bit more oomph, but it's still a crapshoot. If they succeed, feast time. But more often, it's failure, injury, death. And wolves, they're shadowing the hunt like uninvited guests at a wedding, waiting for the humans to wound an animal and leave it bleeding out, then swoop in for the kill steal. Cheeky bastards. Yet, in this pain of survival, something clicks. A wolf pup wanders into camp, too young to know better, and instead of clubbing it, some soft-hearted human, maybe Gronk's kid, feeds it a scrap. Why? Because kids are kids, even in prehistory, and curiosity overrides caution. That pup grows up imprinted on humans, learning that we're not all bad. It starts alerting the tribe to dangers with barks, or helping on hunts by fleshing out prey. Boom! Symbiosis in the making. But let's not romanticize this. The pain is real. Winters are killers. Starvation turns friends into cannibals. Archaeological evidence from sites like Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic shows human settlements with wolf bones nearby, some cut marked like they were eaten. Yeah, early domestication might have involved dining on your potential best friend when times got tough. Absurd, right? One day it's Fido, the next it's fajitas. And the wolves, they're evolving too, unwittingly. Over generations, those that stick around humans develop shorter snouts, floppier ears, traits we now call domestication syndrome. It's like nature's way of saying, if you're gonna hang with these idiots, better look cute to avoid the spear. Selective breeding without intent. Humans favor the friendly ones, wolves favor the food providers. Mutual evolution, but with a sarcastic twist. Neither side planned it, yet here we are. Millennia later, with chihuahuas yapping at our heels, it dived deeper into the timeline. Around 23,000 BCE, at sites like Predmosti in Moravia, we find wolf skulls with perforations. Maybe ritualistic, maybe just bored humans making jewelry, but it hints at a bond. These aren't just wild animals, they're part of the cultural fabric, perhaps even buried with humans as companions in the afterlife. Ironic, isn't it? In a world where life is cheap, death gets all the symbolism. Now, let's talk migration. As the Ice Age thaws around 15,000 BCE, no, wait, we're still in the early phase here. The period from 30,000 to 20,000 BCE is peak glaciation. Humans are clustered in refugia, safe-ish zones like southern Europe or the Siberian steppes. Wolves follow, adapting to the same harsh climes. In Siberia, at places like the Altai Mountains, genetic evidence shows the divergence. Some wolves branch off into what will become dogs. DNA studies, modern science peeking into the past, reveal that dogs split from wolves around 20,000 to 40,000 years ago, with multiple domestication events. Not one grand moment, but a series of awkward flings across continents. Absurdity alert. While Europeans are cozying up to wolves, East Asians might have done the same independently. Or was it a single event that spread? Scientists argue like cats and dogs over this. Pun again intended. But the pain? Imagine crossing the Bering Land Bridge around 15,000 BCE, trudging through snow with wolves tagging along. You're not Lewis and Clark, you're half-frozen nomads praying the ice doesn't crack. Those early proto-dogs? They're pulling makeshift sleds, guarding camps, eating the same meager rations, survival buddies in a frozen apocalypse. Let's personify this a bit more for that storytelling flair. Meet Luna, a wolf bitch. That's the term, folks, no offense, from a pack in ancient France. Her pack's alpha got taken by a cave bear. Nasty business, and now they're struggling. Luna's bolder than most. She sneaks closer to the human fire, drawn by the smell of roasting meat. The humans throw rocks at first, but one night, during a blizzard that howls like banshees, she curls up near the entrance. A human child, shivering, shares a bone. Bond formed. Fast forward generations. Luna's descendants are less wolf, more dog-like. They hunt with humans, sharing kills in a quid pro quo that's hilariously unbalanced. Humans get the muscle and senses, dogs get scraps and protection from bigger predators. But the sarcasm? Dogs lose their wild freedom for belly rubs and leashes, eventual leashes anyway. And humans? We get loyalty that's often one-sided, as any dog owner who's been ignored knows. Engage with me here. Have you ever wondered if your pampered pooch regrets its ancestors' choices? Drop a comment below with your dog's breed and what ancient survival horror you think it escaped. Is it a husky dreaming of Siberian blizzards or a pug whose flat face screams evolutionary mistake? Back to the nightmare. Disease is rampant. No vaccines, no antibiotics. Wolves bring rabies, humans bring who knows what. One bite, and it's a game over in agonizing spasms. Yet, the bond strengthens because shared misery loves company. In graves from Germany, like Bonn Oberkassel around 14,000 BCE, wait, that's later but teasing ahead, we find a human buried with a dog, complete with grave goods. Touching or absurd, honoring a beast in death while living like beasts. As we approach 20,000 BCE, the climate starts shifting. Glaciers retreat slowly like a bad breakup. Forests encroach on tundras, changing the game. Big herds dwindle, hunting gets trickier. Proto-dogs become invaluable, tracking smaller prey in denser woods. Humans innovate. Better tools, art explodes in caves like Lascaux, where wolves might be depicted among the animals. Are they foes or friends in those paintings? The ambiguity is deliciously ironic, but the pain of survival never lets up. Famine years turn tribes against each other. Raids for food, women, territory, wolves, now semi-domesticated, defend their human packs with ferocity. It's like gang warfare with fur, and the absurdity? While we're evolving companions, we're also wiping out competitors, cave lions, hyenas, even other hominids like Neanderthals, who might have tried wolf bonding too, but lost the evolutionary lottery. Neanderthals, oh, the tragedy. They coexisted with wolves, but didn't domesticate them, or if they did, evidence is scarce. Maybe their stockier builds and different social structures didn't mesh. Ironic, the primitive ones miss out on dogs, while we sapiens turn them into lap warmers. Survival's cruel joke. Let's zoom in on a hunt. Gronk's tribe, now with a few proto-dogs, let's call them Scruff and Fang, stalk a deer herd. The dogs flush the prey toward ambushes, spears fly, blood spills. Success. But then a rival tribe attacks, arrows, wait, bows are later, but spears work. Chaos ensues, Fang takes a hit protecting Gronk. Heroic, or just instinct? The bond deepens in blood. As part 1 winds down, don't worry, more absurdity awaits. Reflect on this. The mutual evolution was never noticed because it was too gradual, too wrapped in daily horrors. No eureka moment, just incremental changes over millennia. Wolves became dogs not through grand design, but through shared suffering, ironic alliances, and the absurdity of life finding a way. What do you think? Were our ancestors geniuses or just lucky survivors? Comment your take, and stay tuned for part 2 where we thaw the ice age and see domestication heat up. Word count check. We're at about 2,100 here, but the journey's just beginning. Alright, buckle up folks, because we're diving back into the frozen, filthy, and frankly absurd saga of how wolves became dogs. Last time, we left our shivering ancestors and their scrappy proto-dogs forging an unlikely alliance in the Ice Age's icy grip, around 30,000 to 20,000 BCE. It was less, aw, cute puppy, and more, please don't eat me, I'll share my moldy mammoth bone. Now, as the glaciers start to loosen their chokehold on the planet, we're moving into part 2, roughly 20,000 to 15,000 BCE, where the mutual evolution of humans and wolves gets weirder, messier, and somehow even more ironic. This is a tale of thawing landscapes, shifting diets, and the kind of survival pain that makes you question why anyone bothered living back then. Let's go. The world is still a brutal place, but it's starting to sweat a little. The last glacial maximum is easing up, and the ice sheets are retreating like a bad house guest who finally got the hint. Forests are creeping into what used to be open tundra, turning the hunting game upside down. The megafauna, those woolly mammoths and giant elk that made for epic feasts, are getting scarcer. Humans, still the underdogs of the animal kingdom, are forced to adapt or die. And the wolves, turned proto-dogs, they're along for the ride, evolving from opportunistic scavengers to full-on hunting buddies, whether we like it or not. Picture yourself as Zog, a hunter-gatherer in what's now southern Europe, maybe near the Mediterranean, where the climate's a tad less murderous. You're not exactly living the good life. Your diet is a roulette of roots, berries, and whatever small critters you can catch. Your tribe's got maybe 20 people, half of whom are coughing up a lung, because hygiene is a concept that won't exist for another 20,000 years. Your best weapon is a sharpened stick, and your biggest asset, A couple of scruffy proto-dogs, descendants of those bold wolves who decided human garbage was worth risking their lives for. These proto-dogs, let's call them Snarl and Mutt, are starting to look less like their wild cousins. Their snouts are shorter, their ears floppier, their eyes bigger, like they've been genetically photoshopped to look less threatening. Why? Because the ones that didn't scare the pants off Zog's kids survived to breed. Natural selection's got a sense of humor, turning apex predators into something that might one day star in a TikTok video. But don't be fooled. These aren't lapdogs yet. They're still half wild, capable of ripping out a throat if you cross them. And cross them you might, because food is so scarce you're eyeing Mutt like he might be dinner if the hunt fails again. Here's where the absurdity kicks in. Humans and proto-dogs are now codependent in a way that's almost embarrassing. Zog's tribe depends on Snarl and Mutt to sniff out game trails. Rabbits, deer, maybe a boar if they're lucky. The dogs' noses are like GPS in a world without maps, and their barks warn of rival tribes or predators like cave bears that could turn you into a prehistoric piñata. In return, the dogs get the scraps. Bones, gristle, maybe a bit of organ meat if Zog's feeling generous. But generous? Ha! Zog's starving too. The pain of survival means everyone's on a razor's edge, and sharing food feels like signing your own death warrant. Let's zoom in on a hunt, because this is where the human-dog bromance really starts to shine. Or, more accurately, stumbles into existence. Zog and his crew are tracking a herd of red deer through a forest that's starting to thicken as the climate warms. The dogs, with their pack instincts, are naturals at this. Snarl darts ahead, flushing the deer toward the hunter's ambush. Mutt circles wide, cutting off escape routes. Zog's heart is pounding, not from excitement, but from the very real chance he'll get gored or starve if this fails. The spears fly, a deer goes down, and for once there's meat on the menu. The dogs get their cut, but here's the kicker. They're not just scavengers anymore. They're earning their keep, and Zog's starting to see them as something more than walking emergency rations. But the irony? This partnership is built on mistrust. Zog doesn't fully trust Snarl. He's seen those teeth in action. And Snarl. He's not wagging his tail out of love. He's sticking around because Zog's camp is a buffet compared to the slim pickings in the wild. It's a marriage of convenience, like two roommates who hate each other but can't afford to move out. And yet, this grudging alliance is rewriting both species' futures. Now, let's talk about the bigger picture, because the world's changing fast, or as fast as geology allows, which is agonizingly slow by human standards. As the ice retreats, human populations spread further, following game across land bridges like the one connecting Siberia to Alaska. Proto-dogs tag along because where humans go, food waste follows. Archaeological sites like those in the Levant or the Siberian steppes showed dog-like remains, smaller than wolves, with telltale signs of domestication like crowded teeth or shorter muzzles. These aren't isolated incidents. Genetic evidence suggests multiple domestication events across Eurasia. That's right. Humans and wolves kept stumbling into this messed up relationship in different places, like history's worst dating app. Here's a fun bit of historical absurdity. While Zog's tribe in Europe is bonding with proto-dogs, over in East Asia, another group of humans is doing the same, maybe with a different wolf subspecies. DNA studies, because science loves to ruin a good story with facts, show that modern dogs have genetic markers from both European and Asian wolf populations. So, either dogs were domesticated once and spread like wildfire, or humans kept reinventing the wheel, turning wolves into dogs wherever they went. Imagine the cosmic joke, different tribes, thousands of miles apart, all deciding, hey, that snarling beast looks like it needs a belly rub. But survival's pain doesn't let up, even as the climate softens. Disease is a constant specter, parasites, infections, and don't even get me started on dental health. Ever seen a 20,000-year-old human skull? Those teeth look like a horror movie prop. Proto-dogs aren't faring much better. They're riddled with worms from eating raw meat, and yet they're starting to integrate into human life in ways that are both touching and darkly hilarious. In some camps, kids play with dog pups, teaching them tricks by accident. A kid tosses a stick, the pup chases it, and suddenly fetches born. Not as a game, but as a survival tactic to keep the dogs engaged. Let's personify this with a new character. Kaya, a young woman in Zog's tribe, who's got a soft spot for Mutt's latest litter. Kaya's life is no picnic. Her last childbirth nearly killed her, and she's got scars from a wolf attack years ago. But she sees potential in these pups, especially one she names Ember for its reddish fur. Ember's bolder than the rest, following Kaya everywhere, even into the danger zone near rival tribes. One night, Ember's yapping saves the camp from a raid. Rival humans, not wolves, looking to steal food or worse. Kaya's gratitude means Ember gets extra scraps, which means Ember's genes, friendlier, less aggressive, get passed on. Evolution's playing matchmaker, and it's got a twisted sense of humor. Now, let's add a layer of historical irony. Around 18,000 BCE, humans are getting artsy. Cave paintings in places like Chauvet, France, show animals in vivid detail. Bison, horses, maybe even wolves. Are these proto-dogs in the art, or just their wild cousins? We don't know, but imagine Zog staring at a cave wall, painting a dog-like figure next to a human hunter. Is it reverence, fear, or just boredom during a long winter? The fact that we're even asking shows how deep this bond is getting, even if nobody's writing poetry about it yet. The pain of survival keeps rearing its ugly head. Famine hits when game migrates or a drought kills off the berries. Tribes turn on each other, and proto-dogs get caught in the crossfire. Some are killed defending their humans, others are eaten when desperation trumps loyalty. Archaeological digs, like those at sites in Germany or Russia, showed dog-like bones with cut marks, proof that man's best friend was sometimes man's best meal. Absurd, right? One minute you're sharing a cave with a dog, the next you're wondering if it tastes better roasted or stewed, but the bond grows stronger despite the betrayal. Proto-dogs are now part of the tribe's social fabric. They're not just tools, they're family. Dysfunctional, sure, but family. In some cultures, they're buried with humans, like at a site in Israel's Natufian culture. Okay, that's a bit later, but the seeds are being sown. These burials suggest dogs aren't just livestock, they're companions, maybe even spiritual allies. Ironic, isn't it? In a world where life is brutal and short, we're making room for sentimentality over a furry scavenger. Let's talk migration again, because humans are on the move. As the ice melts, some tribes head east, crossing into the Americas via the Bering Land Bridge. Proto-dogs come too, because why not? They're hooked on human scraps like we're hooked on coffee today. Genetic evidence from ancient dog remains in Alaska shows these early migrants brought their canine buddies, who helped hunt in the New World's vast wilderness. Imagine the absurdity. You're trekking across a frozen wasteland, half dead from exhaustion, and your only friend is a dog who's probably plotting to steal your last bite of seal fat. Engage with me here. What's the most ridiculous thing your dog does that makes you think it's still got some of that ancient wolf survival instinct? Drop a comment below. Does your golden retriever guard its food bowl like it's defending a mammoth carcass? Or does your chihuahua think it's an alpha wolf? I want to hear it. Back to the story. The climate's warming, but don't picture palm trees and pina coladas. It's still cold, wet, and miserable half the time. Humans are experimenting with new tech, better spear points, maybe early bows in some regions. Proto-dogs are adapting too, their diets shifting to include more human leftovers, which messes with their digestion but makes them less reliant on wild game. This dietary shift is another evolutionary nudge. Dogs that can stomach human food, starchy roots, half-rotten meat, survive better than their picky wolf cousins. Here's a dark twist. As humans settle into semi-permanent camps, proto-dogs start acting as garbage disposals. They eat the waste, human, animal, you name it, keeping camps cleaner and reducing disease. Gross? Yes. But it's a survival edge in a world where a bad infection means game over. The irony is that dogs are becoming sanitation workers before sanitation is even a concept. Talk about a thankless job. Let's wrap this part with a scene. Kaya's tribe is camped by a river, the first green shoots of spring poking through the mud. Ember's grown into a lean, loyal proto-dog, her pups already showing those domesticated traits, smaller jaws, friendlier demeanor. A rival tribe attacks at dawn, but Ember's pack raises the alarm, giving Zog's people time to grab their spears. The battle's brutal, blood, screams, the works, but the dogs fight alongside the humans, turning the tide. Victory comes at a cost. Half the tribe's injured, and one of Ember's pups doesn't make it. Kaya buries it with a stone pendant, a gesture that's equal parts grief and absurdity in a world where survival trumps sentiment. As we close part 2, clocking in at about 2050 words, the mutual evolution is picking up speed. Humans and dogs are locked in a dance of dependence, driven by hunger, fear, and the occasional flicker of loyalty. The Ice Age is thawing, but the pain of survival and the irony of this partnership are only heating up. What's next? More migrations, more fights, and the slow, sarcastic march toward the dogs we know today. Comment below. Do you think Zog and Kaya saw their proto-dogs as friends or just tools for survival? And stick around for part 3, where we'll see how this messy alliance starts reshaping human society itself. Alright, here we go, plunging back into the chaotic, ironic, and downright painful saga of how wolves became dogs. We're now in part 3, roughly 15,000 to 12,000 BCE, where the Ice Age is loosening its icy grip, but life's still a relentless grind. The world's warming, humans are getting craftier, and our proto-dogs, those scruffy, half-wild companions, are starting to look like actual dogs, not just wolves with better PR. This chapter's packed with survival struggles, absurd partnerships, and the kind of historical irony that makes you wonder how we didn't all go extinct. Let's dive into the mess. The glaciers are retreating faster now, like a bad ex finally leaving town. Forests are spreading, swallowing up the open steppes where megafauna once roamed. The woolly mammoths and giant sloths are on their way out, either hunted to oblivion or screwed over by the climate. Humans, still scrappy, still barely holding on, are adapting like mad. We're not just hunter-gatherers anymore. We're tinkering with new tools, new strategies, and most importantly, new relationships with those proto-dogs who've decided our trash heaps are worth the risk. This isn't a heartwarming tale of loyalty, though. It's a gritty, sarcastic story of two species stuck together because the alternative is a cold, lonely death. Meet Tala, a young hunter in what's now the Near East, maybe the Levant, where the climate's a bit more forgiving, but still no picnic. Tala's tribe is camped near a river, living in semi-permanent shelters made of branches and hides. Think less cozy cabin and more drafty shack that smells like despair. They're experimenting with new ways to survive, grinding wild grains into something vaguely edible, weaving baskets and sharpening flint into blades that don't break on the first stab. Life's a constant hustle, and Tala's got two proto-dogs, Ash and Cinder, who've become as essential as his spear. These dogs aren't pets, they're co-workers in the brutal startup called Survival. Ash and Cinder are the descendants of those bold wolves from part 1. Now several generations into this bizarre human-adjacent life. Their jaws are shorter, their coats patchier, and they've got this unnerving habit of staring at you like they know something you don't. They're not fully domesticated. Think of them as the coworker who shows up for the paycheck, but might still punch you in the parking lot. They hunt with Tala's tribe, flushing out game like rabbits or small deer in the thickening forests. They guard the camp at night, barking at leopards or rival humans who'd love to steal your last handful of barley. In return, they get scraps, a spot by the fire, and the occasional pat from Tala's kid sister, who's convinced Cinder's her best friend. Here's the absurdity. This partnership is starting to reshape both species in ways nobody could have predicted. Humans like Tala are getting better at hunting because of the dog's senses. Noses that can smell a deer a mile away. Ears that twitch at the snap of a twig. But it's not all high fives and tail wags. Food is still scarce, and sharing with dogs feels like a tax on your already empty stomach. Tala's tribe is one bad hunt away from starvation, and every bone tossed to Ash is a bone Tala's kid might need. The pain of survival means tough choices. Feed the dog, feed the family, or, dark twist, eat the dog if things get dire. Archaeological sites from this period, like those in the Natufian culture of the Levant, showed dog-like bones with cut marks. Yup, man's best friend was sometimes man's main course. Let's zoom in on a day in Tala's life, because the devil's in the details, and the details are grim. It's dawn, and the tribe's preparing for a hunt. The forest is dense now, making big game hunting a nightmare. Tala's got his flint-tipped spears, but the real MVPs are Ash and Cinder, who can navigate the underbrush like furry ninjas. The target? A herd of gazelles, skittish and fast. The dogs move like a SWAT team, herding the gazelles toward a narrow ravine where Tala and his buddies wait with spears. It's a success. One gazelle down, enough meat for a week. The dogs get their share, but here's the irony. Tala's tribe is starting to rely on them so much that losing a dog feels like losing a hunter. When Cinder gets injured in the next hunt, Tala risks his own rations to nurse her back to health. Loyalty? Maybe. Or maybe he just knows he's screwed without her. Now, let's talk about the bigger picture, because this isn't just Tala's story, it's humanity's. Around 15,000 BCE, humans are spreading like roaches, following the retreating ice into new territories. In Europe, the Magdalenian culture is thriving. Well, thriving is generous. They're surviving with style, painting caves with stunning art and carving bone into tools. Proto-dogs are everywhere, their remains popping up in sites from Spain to Siberia. Genetic studies, because modern nerds love ancient DNA, show that dogs were diverging from wolves in multiple places, with distinct lineages in Europe, Asia, and maybe even the Americas. It's like the universe decided every human tribe needed a canine sidekick, whether they wanted one or not. But here's the historical absurdity. While Tala's tribe is bonding with dogs, they're also fighting for their lives against nature and each other. Rival tribes raid for resources, food, tools, even people. Dogs like Ash become early warning systems, their barks saving lives in the dead of night. But they're also liabilities. A barking dog can give away your position, turning your camp into a target. Imagine the irony. Your survival buddy might get you killed because it won't shut up. And don't forget the predators, lions, hyenas, bears, that see both humans and dogs as snacks. One bad night and Tala's camp could be a buffet. Let's add a layer of pain, because survival's never just about food and shelter. Disease is a silent killer. No one's washing their hands, and the camp's a petri dish of bacteria. Dogs bring fleas, ticks, maybe even rabies, which is a death sentence in a world without medicine. Humans give dogs their own diseases. Think parasites from eating half-rotten meat. Yet this shared misery strengthens the bond. Dogs start sleeping closer to the fire, not just for warmth, but because they're learning humans mean safety. And humans? They're starting to see dogs as more than tools. Tala's sister buries a stillborn pup with a necklace of shells, a gesture that's absurdly touching in a world where death is routine. Now, let's get sarcastic about the cultural shifts. As humans settle into more permanent camps, think proto-villages in the Levant or Anatolia, dogs become the world's first sanitation crew. They eat the garbage, the poop, the scraps that would otherwise rot and breed flies. Gross? Absolutely. But it's a survival hack, keeping camps cleaner and humans healthier. The irony? Dogs are doing public health before humans even invent the concept of a village. And they're not getting any credit, just a bone if they're lucky. Migration's still a thing, and dogs are tagging along like loyal roadies. Across the Bering Land Bridge, humans and their proto-dogs are hitting the Americas, chasing game into a new frontier. Sites like Bluefish Caves in Canada show dog-like remains from this period, hinting that these furry companions were pulling their weight. Maybe even pulling sleds, though that's speculative. Imagine trekking across a frozen wasteland with a dog that's half-starved but still growling at anything that moves. That's not a pet, that's a partner in crime. Here's a scene to drive it home. Tala's tribe is celebrating a rare good hunt, 2 gazelles, enough to feed everyone for days. The camp's alive with chatter, kids playing, dogs gnawing on bones. But then, disaster. A flash flood hits, the river swollen from melting ice. Tala grabs his sister, but Ash bolts into the chaos, dragging a kid to safety before the water sweeps him away. The tribe mourns Ash like a fallen warrior, which is absurd when you think about it, grieving a dog when human life is so cheap. But it's a sign. Dogs aren't just animals anymore. They're part of the tribe, woven into the messy fabric of human existence. Let's talk tech, because humans are innovating like crazy. Bows and arrows are starting to appear in some regions, giving hunters a better shot at distant prey. Dogs complement this perfectly, chasing down wounded animals that might otherwise escape. It's a deadly combo, but it's not foolproof. A bad shot, a missed kill, and Tala's tribe is back to chewing roots and praying for spring. The dogs, meanwhile, are evolving to eat whatever humans eat. Starchy plants, scraps of fish, even early experiments with bread like mush. Their guts are changing, their teeth shrinking, all because they're hitching their wagon to our dysfunctional star. The irony deepens when you look at the social side. Dogs are starting to act as social glue, easing tensions within tribes. When Tala's cousin argues over who gets the best cut of meat, Cinder's playful antics distract everyone, diffusing the fight. It's accidental diplomacy, but it works. Dogs are becoming mediators, therapists, and guards, all without a paycheck. And humans? We're starting to breed them selectively, not consciously, but by favoring the friendliest, most useful ones. It's evolution by vibes, and it's hilariously haphazard. Engage with me here. What's the one thing your dog does that makes you think it's got a bit of Tala's proto-dog in it? Is it the way it guards your house like a fortress, or steals food like a Paleolithic scavenger? Drop a comment below. I'm dying to know what ancient instincts your pup's channeling. As we near the end of part 3, hitting around 2,100 words, the mutual evolution is in full swing. Dogs are no longer just wolves with a side hustle. They're a new species, Canis familiaris, carved out by human hands and human garbage. The pain of survival is still there, famine, disease, violence, but dogs are easing the burden, even if it's just by eating the trash or barking at the right moment. The absurdity? We're still not noticing this epic transformation. It's just another day in the grind, another step in a partnership nobody planned. Comment below, do you think Tala saw his dogs as family, or were they still just tools with fur? And brace yourself for part 4, where we'll hit the dawn of agriculture and see how dogs go from camp buddies to full-on domesticated chaos. Stay tuned. Alright, here we go folks. The grand finale of our wild, ironic, and painfully absurd journey through the mutual evolution of humans and wolves into the dogs we know today. We're now in part 4, roughly 12,000 to 10,000 BCE, teetering on the edge of the Neolithic Revolution. The Ice Age is mostly a bad memory. The world's warming up, and humans are about to flip the script on survival with something called agriculture. But don't get too cozy. This is still a brutal, messy world where starvation, violence, and disease are your neighbors, and our proto-dogs, now looking more like actual dogs, are cemented as humanity's sidekicks in this chaotic ride. It's a story of accidental alliances, sarcastic survival, and the kind of historical absurdity that makes you glad you're watching this from a comfy couch. Let's dive in. The glaciers have mostly retreated, leaving behind lush valleys and rivers swollen with meltwater. The landscape's greener, but don't mistake it for paradise. Life's still a meat grinder. Famine looms when the rains fail, predators lurk, and rival tribes are ready to bash your skull for a handful of grain. Humans are settling down, though, in places like the Fertile Crescent, where wild wheat and barley are tempting us to stop wandering and start farming. This is the dawn of the Neolithic, but it's less a revolution and more a slow, painful lurch towards something resembling civilization. And the dogs? They're no longer just scavengers or hunting buddies. They're woven into the fabric of human life, for better or worse. Meet Rin, a woman in a proto-village in what's now Jordan or Syria. Her tribes built mud brick huts, a far cry from the caves of 30,000 BCE, but still drafty and smelling like sweat and smoke. They're experimenting with planting seeds, wild emmer wheat, barley, maybe some lentils, because chasing game is getting old. Rin's got a family to feed, a husband who's limping from a hunting injury, and a kid who's always sick because sanitation is a pipe dream. Her secret weapon? A pack of dogs, let's call them Dust, Blaze, and Little Pip, who've gone from wolfish outcasts to village fixtures. These dogs are smaller, friendlier, with floppy ears and wagging tails, but they're still tough enough to scare off a jackal or a thief. Here's the irony. As humans start settling, dogs become the ultimate multitaskers. Dust guards the grain stores from rats and rival humans. Blaze helps herd the goats that Rin's tribe is starting to domesticate. Because why stop at dogs when you can tame everything? Pip, the runt, is basically a therapy dog, keeping Rin's kid calm during the endless nights of coughing and crying. But this isn't a petting zoo. Food is still tight, and every mouthful given to a dog is a gamble. Rin's husband grumbles, "Why feed those mutts when we're starving?" And Rin snaps back, "Because they keep us alive, you idiot." It's a marriage counselor's nightmare, but it's also the truth. Let's zoom in on a day in Rin's village, because this is where the human-dog bond gets both heartwarming and absurdly complicated. It's harvest season. Well, harvest is generous for the pathetic clumps of wheat they're scraping together. Dust is patrolling the edges of the village, barking at anything that moves, which is great until he scares off a trader bringing flint tools. Blaze is out with the hunters, chasing down wild goats that are getting harder to find as forests shrink and farmland expands. Pip's curled up with Rin's kid, who's named the dog after the sound it makes, because creativity is low when you're malnourished. Then disaster strikes. A rival tribe raids at dusk, aiming to steal the grain. Dust and Blaze go full berserker, biting and barking, giving Rin's people time to grab their spears. The raid's repelled, but Blaze takes an arrow. Rin buries him with a clay figurine, a gesture that's equal parts grief and absurdity in a world where death is as common as dirt. Now, let's talk big picture, because this is where the mutual evolution hits overdrive. The shift to agriculture is rewriting the rules. Humans are staying put, building villages like Jericho, with walls to keep out enemies and dogs to guard the gaps. These dogs aren't just hunters anymore. They're sentinels, pest control, and even status symbols. Yeah, status, because nothing says I'm thriving in 10,000 BCE like a dog that doesn't immediately try to eat you. Archaeological sites from this period, like Ayin Malaha in Israel, showed dog burials with humans, sometimes with grave goods like shells or stones. It's touching, sure, but also hilariously ironic. We're honoring dogs in death while still occasionally eating them when the crops fail. The pain of survival is relentless. Early farming is a gamble. Droughts, pests, or a bad seed batch can wipe you out. Rin's village loses half its crop to locusts, and the dogs get skinnier as the humans tighten their belts. Disease is still a killer. Smallpox is starting to rear its ugly head, and dogs carry fleas that spread who knows what. Yet, the bond deepens. Dogs are now eating human food, grain mush, fish bones, whatever's left, changing their biology further. Genetic studies show their digestive systems adapting to starch, a far cry from their wolf ancestors' meat-only diet. It's like evolution saying, "Congrats, you're now a carb-loading canine." Here's the absurdity. Dogs are becoming cultural icons before culture's even a thing. In Rin's village, kids carve dog shapes into clay, maybe as toys, maybe as offerings. Elders tell stories of the great wolves who chose to join humans, spinning myths out of survival's gritty reality. It's the ultimate historical irony. We're creating folklore about a partnership born from scavenging and desperation. And dogs? They're not just along for the ride, they're shaping human society. They guard the first granaries, chase off wolves, their own cousins, talk about family drama, and even help herd the first domesticated animals. Goats, sheep, eventually cattle. Dogs are the unsung heroes of the barnyard, and they're not even getting a union. Let's add a layer of sarcasm with the social dynamics. Villages mean more people, more drama. Rin's neighbor is always arguing over land boundaries, and Dust's barking doesn't help when it wakes everyone at midnight. But dogs also ease tensions. Pip's antics make the kids laugh, calming feuds before they turn bloody. It's accidental diplomacy, and it's hilarious that a half-starved mutt is better at peacekeeping than the adults. Meanwhile, dogs are breeding like roaches, their genes shifting toward docility. Humans favor the friendly ones, the ones that don't snap at kids or steal the best cuts of meat. It's selective breeding by default, and it's turning wolves into pugs, one generation at a time. Migration's still happening, but it's slower now. People are settling, building roots, literally and figuratively. Dogs spread with them, their DNA mixing as humans trade goods and genes across the Fertile Crescent and beyond. Sites in Turkey, like Çatalhöyük, a bit later, but the seeds are here, show dogs integrated into village life, their bones mixed with human refuse. Genetic evidence points to a complex web, dogs domesticated in multiple places, their lineages crisscrossing as humans move. It's like a canine soap opera, with East Asian dogs mingling with European ones, creating the mutts we love today. Here's a dark twist. As villages grow, so does inequality. Some families have more grain, better huts, maybe even a surplus to trade. Dogs become symbols of wealth. Owning a pack means you're eating well enough to feed them. But for the have-nots, dogs are a luxury they can't afford. In lean times, those without dogs raid those with, and the dogs fight to the death defending their humans. It's a microcosm of the class warfare to come, and it's absurd that dogs are caught up in it before class is even a word. Let's paint a final scene. Rin's village is thriving, relatively speaking. They've got a surplus of barley, a few goats, and a new litter of pups from Dust, but a drought hits and the mood sours. Rin's kid, weak from hunger, clings to Pip, who's barely eating either. One night, a wolf pack, distant cousins of the village dogs, creeps close, drawn by the smell of stored grain. Dust leads the village dogs in a standoff, their barks echoing like a war cry. The wolves back off, but not before one of Rin's neighbors panics and kills a pup, thinking it's a wolf. The mistake is heartbreaking, and Rin's kid buries the pup with a handful of barley seeds. A futile, absurdly human gesture in a world that doesn't care. Engage with me here. What's the one trait in your dog that screams, "I'm descended from these Neolithic survivors"? Is it the way it guards your snacks like they're the last grain in the village, or how it howls like it's still fending off wolves? Drop a comment below. I want to hear your dog's ancient drama. As we wrap part 4, clocking in at about 2050 words, the mutual evolution of humans and dogs is complete, or as complete as it gets. Dogs are no longer wolves, they're Canis familiaris, a species molded by human hands, human trash, and human desperation. The pain of survival, hunger, disease, raids forged this bond, but so did the absurd, accidental moments of loyalty and trust. The irony, nobody noticed it happening. It was just another day, another hunt, another fight to stay alive. Dogs became our partners, not through grand design, but through a sarcastic twist of fate, a partnership born in the muck of prehistory. So, what's your take? Did Rin and her dogs change the world, or were they just surviving the chaos like the rest of us? Comment below with your thoughts and tell me what you want to explore next. Maybe the rise of cats, or how humans turned wheat into bread and beer. This saga's done, but the absurdity of history never ends. Thanks for sticking with me. Woof. Imagine this, a sleek razor-clawed wildcat slinking through the shadows of ancient fields, eyes glowing like embers, ready to pounce on unsuspecting prey. Fast forward millennia, and that same lineage is now lounging on your couch, batting at a laser pointer, demanding belly rubs and gourmet kibble. How did nature's stealthy assassins become our lazy overlords? Strap in for the hilarious, horrifying tale of how wildcats clawed their way from hunters to sofa kings. Picture the scene. It's around 12,000 BCE, and the world is finally shaking off the last shivers of the Ice Age. Humanity's just figured out this wild idea called agriculture in the Fertile Crescent, that swath of land from the Nile to the Tigris and Euphrates, where rivers flood like clockwork and turn dirt into gold. But gold? Ha! More like barley and wheat, the kind of crops that attract every rodent in a 100-mile radius. Our ancestors aren't living in luxury. They're scratching out existence in mud huts, battling famine, floods, and the constant ache of backbreaking labor. Survival's a joke without a punchline. Plant seeds, pray for rain, hope the locusts don't turn your field into a buffet. Enter the African wildcat, Felis silvestris libica, the OG feline gangster. These aren't your fluffy Persians. They're lean, mean killing machines, about the size of a house cat, but with attitudes that scream, "Touch me and die." Solitary hunters, they'd rather stalk a mouse in the moonlight than join a pack. They're striped like desert camouflage, with ears perked for the faintest rustle and claws that could shred leather. In the wilds of North Africa and the Near East, they're apex predators of the small and squeaky, feasting on rodents, birds, and whatever slithers too slow. But here's the absurdity. Humans start storing grain in pits and silos. Primitive ones, sure, but magnets for mice and rats. These pests aren't cute Disney sidekicks. They're plague bringers, devouring stores that could mean the difference between life and starvation. A bad rodent infestation? Your family's gnawing on roots while the kids waste away. Painful, right? The daily grind of survival means every calorie counts, and losing half your harvest to furry thieves is a death sentence wrapped in whiskers. So, some bold wildcats, probably the ones too lazy or smart to hunt in the barren wilds, start lurking around human settlements. Why risk the desert's dangers when there's a rodent rave happening in that granary? It's not love at first sight, it's mutual exploitation. Humans tolerate these shadowy visitors because they cull the vermin. A cat slinks in, guts a rat, and suddenly it's the unsung hero of the village. But tolerate is the key word. Our ancestors aren't cooing over kittens. They're survivors who've seen friends die from infected bites or empty bellies. One wrong move, and that cat's on the menu or chased off with stones. Let's personify this mess. Meet Zara, a farmer's wife in a dusty village near the Jordan River, around 10,000 BCE. Zara's life is no rom-com. She's up at dawn grinding emmer wheat with stones that blister her hands, fetching water from a river that might flood tomorrow, and watching her toddler for snakes or scorpions. Her husband, let's call him Kale, is out plowing with a wooden ard, basically a stick, that barely scratches the soil. Famine's a constant shadow. Last year, a drought turned the fields to dust, and they buried 2 kids who couldn't fight the hunger pangs. One evening, as the sun dips like a bad omen, Zara spots a striped shadow near the grain pit. It's a wildcat, eyes locked on a scampering mouse. Instead of screaming, Zara freezes, because that mouse just nibbled her last hope for winter. The cat pounces, a blur of fur and fangs in the rodent's history. Zara tosses a scrap of flatbread, not out of kindness, but calculation. "Stay, you mangy thing," she mutters. The cat, let's name her Shadow, doesn't bolt. Why? Because human trash heaps are rodent resorts, and Shadow's no fool. Over weeks, Shadow sticks around, birthing kittens in a hidden nook. Zara's kid finds them, wide-eyed fluff balls that hiss like demons but play with strings of sinew. The pain? One kitten gets snatched by a hawk, another trampled in a stampede of goats. Survival's cruel lottery. But the survivors? They learn humans mean food, indirectly. Zara starts leaving scraps, not because she's soft, but because fewer rats mean more grain, more life. This is self-domestication at its most sarcastic. Cats didn't beg for belly rubs. They invited themselves to the pest party. Genetic evidence. Yeah, modern science digging up ancient bones shows these early cats diverged from wild ones around 10,000 years ago. Their coats stayed camouflaged, but behavior shifted. Less aggression, more tolerance for noisy humans. Why? The chill cats got fed, the spitters got speared. Absurdity alert. While dogs were out hunting with us like loyal sidekicks, cats were the aloof roommates who pay rent by killing bugs. No grand partnership, just opportunistic loitering. In sites like Jericho, one of the oldest settlements, archaeologists find cat bones mingled with human refuse. Were they pets? Ha! More like tolerated exterminators. One dig shows a cat buried under a floor. Ritual or just disposal? The ambiguity screams historical irony. Dive deeper into the nightmare. Life in the Neolithic is a horror show. No antibiotics, so a scratch from a cat could fester into sepsis, turning your arm black and your fever delirious. Zara loses a finger to infection after breaking up a cat fight. Floods wipe out villages, earthquakes bury them. Tribes raid each other for grain, spears flying, blood soaking the earth. Shadow's descendants defend the stores, hissing at intruders, but they're collateral in the chaos. One raid, and a kitten skewered like shish kebab. Yet the bond forms grudgingly. Kittens raised near humans' imprint, rubbing legs for scraps, purring like tiny engines. Purring? That's evolution's joke, a vibration that heals bones and soothes stress. But back then, it's just a weird noise that makes Zara smile amid the drudgery. Kids play with them, teaching fetch with feathers, accidental training that favors playful genes. Let's talk migration. As agriculture spreads, from the Fertile Crescent to Anatolia, the Levant, cats hitch rides on donkey carts or in grain sacks. Rodents follow the farms, cats follow the rodents, humans follow the food. It's a chain of absurdity. We're domesticating plants, animals domesticate themselves on our vermin. In Cyprus, around 9,500 BCE, a grave holds a human and a cat, buried together. Touching or practical, like take your pest control to the afterlife. The pain never quits. Childbirth is a gamble. Zara delivers in dirt, no midwives, just screams and blood. Cats? They birth litters in hidden spots, half dying from weakness or predators. Survival's math. More kittens mean more rodent control, but feed them or starve? Zara chooses control, tossing fish heads from the river. Historical irony. Egyptians aren't yet worshipping cats. That's later, but in the Near East, felines sneak into myths. A scratched pottery shard shows a cat-like figure chasing rats. Art born from necessity. Villages grow, cats multiply. By 8000 BCE, distinct domestic traits emerge. Slightly smaller size, varied coats, but still wild at heart. Engage with me. Ever caught your cat staring like it's plotting world domination? That's the wildcat ancestry talking. Comment below. What's your cat's most feral habit, and where are you watching from? Let's see if modern kitties still echo Zara's shadow. Back to the grind. A drought hits Zara's village. Rivers shrink, crops wither. Rats swarm the dwindling stores, bold as brass. Shadow and her kin go into overdrive, a feline frenzy of kills. But humans suffer. Kyle collapses in the field, sunstroke claiming him. Zara's alone, kid clinging, cats circling like guardians. Absurd. She talks to Shadow, spilling tears on fur. The cat doesn't care, but stays, for the mice, sure, but maybe something more. As part 1 claws to a close, around 2,100 words, the wildcats are inching toward domestication, not through cuddles but carnage control. The pain of survival forges this uneasy truce, laced with irony. Humans tame the land, cats tame the pests, nobody tames the cats. Stay tuned for part 2, where Egypt turns these mousers into gods and the absurdity skyrockets. What do you think? Were early humans cat people or just desperate? Comment your take. Alright folks, we're back to claw our way through part 2 of how wildcats went from stealthy hunters to the fluffy tyrants ruling your sofa. We're zooming into 8,000 to 6,000 BCE, where the Fertile Crescent is buzzing with proto-cities, agriculture's taking root, and humans are learning the hard way that farming's no fairy tale. It's a sweaty, buggy, rodent-infested nightmare. Our wildcats, those Felis silvestris libica with their desert-striped swagger, are now semi-regulars in human settlements, not because we're charming, but because our grain piles are a rodent buffet. This isn't a love story, it's a sarcastic, survival-driven deal where cats exploit our trash and we tolerate their aloofness. Buckle up for more historical absurdity, the gritty pain of Neolithic life. The world's getting crowded, or as crowded as a few thousand mud brick huts can get. Places like Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey are popping up, with people packed tighter than sardines, living in homes you enter through the roof because doors are apparently overrated. Agriculture's spreading like a bad rumor, and with it comes surplus grain, stored in clay jars or pits that scream all you can eat to every rat within sniffing distance. Humans are still one drought away from starvation, one raid away from a spear in the gut. Life's a brutal gamble. Plant seeds, pray for rain, and hope your neighbor doesn't steal your harvest or your kids. Enter the wildcats, now a bit less wild, slinking around villages like they own the place. These aren't your Instagram famous tabbies. They're lean, mean, and still packing claws that could carve your face like a pumpkin. But evolution's playing a prank. Those cats bold enough to loiter near humans are getting a survival edge. Why hunt in the wild when Zara's village, yep, we're back with her, or maybe her daughter, let's call her Mira, is a rodent paradise? Mice, rats, voles, they're gorging on grain, breeding like roaches, and spreading diseases that make your skin crawl, literally. A single rat can ruin a family's winter stash, turning a lean season into a mass funeral. Mira's life is no picnic. She's in her 20s, already widowed because her husband caught an arrow during a raid over a barley field. She's raising a son who's half-starved, his ribs poking through like a grim xylophone. Her village, a maze of mud brick homes, smells like smoke, sweat, and desperation. She grinds grain till her hands bleed, weaves baskets to store it, and prays the river doesn't flood again. The pain? Last year, fever took half the kids, including her nephew, and the rats didn't help, contaminating food with droppings that carry death. Survival's a daily middle finger from the universe. But here's where the cats strut in, all attitude and no loyalty. Mira's got a regular now, a wiry feline she calls Ember for her fiery eyes. Ember's not a pet, she's a contract killer with fur. She stalks the grain stores, dispatching rats with surgical precision. Mira doesn't trust her, those claws are no joke, but she tosses fish scraps from the river to keep Ember around. Why? Because a single cat can kill dozens of rodents a week, and that's the difference between eating and burying your kid. Other cats join the party, drawn by the same deal. Free food for freelance pest control. Their kittens, born under Mira's hut, start life around humans, learning we're not the enemy, just the idiots with the grain. This is domestication's sarcastic middle act. Cats aren't begging for cuddles, they're running a protection racket. Genetic studies, because science loves to dissect history, show these early domestic cats had mutations for tameness, like reduced fear of humans. Their coats are starting to vary, spotted, tabby, maybe a rare black one. because humans favor the ones that don't hiss or bolt. But it's not love, it's a truce. Mira's son plays with Ember's kittens, tossing reeds they chase like tiny ninjas. It's cute until one scratches him, and Mira's cleaning pus from a wound for weeks. No antibiotics, just herbs and hope, and hope's in short supply. Let's zoom in on a night in Mira's village because the absurdity shines in the details. It's harvest time, and the air is thick with dust and tension. The grain's piled high, but so are the rats, scurrying like they've got a vendetta. Ember and her kin are on patrol, their eyes glinting in the firelight as they rack up kills. Mira's out checking traps, her son asleep in the hut, when a rival tribe creeps in, spears ready to steal the harvest. The cats go berserk, yowling like banshees, waking the village. Mira grabs a flint knife, her neighbors rally, and the raiders scatter, but not before one kills a kitten, mistaking it for a threat. Mira's son cries, burying the tiny body with a clay bead. It's absurdly human, grieving a cat when humans drop like flies. Now, the bigger picture, because this isn't just Mira's drama, it's a global shift. Agriculture's spreading from the Fertile Crescent to Egypt, Anatolia, even the Indus Valley. With it, cats spread too, hitching rides in grain baskets or following the rodent trail. Sites like Shilarokambos in Cyprus show cat bones alongside human settlements, proof these felines are becoming fixtures. One grave, dated around 7,500 BCE, has a cat buried near a human, maybe a sign of affection, maybe just a practical keep killing rats in the afterlife. A vibe. The irony? Cats are domesticating themselves faster than humans can domesticate goats or sheep. The pain of survival is unrelenting. Droughts turn fields to dust. Floods turn villages to mud. Mira's son catches a fever from rat-contaminated water, and she's powerless, rubbing his forehead with damp rags while Ember curls nearby, oblivious. Disease is a silent killer. Typhoid, dysentery, parasites from living too close to animals and filth. Cats help by eating the vectors, but they're not immune. Fleas jump from fur to human skin, spreading misery. One bad season, and Mira's village loses a third of its people, bodies buried in shallow graves because there's no strength for ceremony. Here's the historical absurdity. Cats are starting to worm their way into culture, and it's hilariously accidental. In Çatalhöyük, wall paintings show cat-like figures, maybe wildcats, maybe early domestics, chasing prey. Are they art? Magic? Just bored doodles? Nobody's writing Ode to a Mouser yet, but the seeds are there. Kids carve cat shapes into bone, elders mutter about spirits in feline form. It's mythology born from necessity, and it's ironic that a creature who cares zero about us is becoming a symbol. Social dynamics add another layer of sarcasm. Villages mean politics, petty feuds over who gets the best plot or the biggest share of grain. Cats, oblivious to human drama, become accidental mediators. Mira's neighbor, a grump named Tor, stops arguing when a kitten climbs his leg, distracting him with its chaos. It's not diplomacy, it's just cats being cats. But it works, and the friendlier ones breed more, their genes spreading like gossip. Evolution's laughing. Humans think they're in charge, but cats are picking their own winners. Migration keeps the story moving. As humans trade grain, tools, and ideas, cats tag along, their range expanding from the Levant to North Africa. In Egypt, where the Nile's bounty fuels bigger settlements, cats are starting to get noticed. Not worshipped yet, that's coming, but valued. A clay pot from 7000 BCE shows a cat etched beside a granary, a nod to their utility. Meanwhile, wild cat populations dwindle as humans overhunt their prey, pushing more felines toward villages. It's a cosmic joke. We're wrecking their habitat, so they move in with us. Let's paint a scene for the pain. Mira's village is hit by a plague, maybe typhus from rat fleas. Half the huts are silent, the air thick with moans and the stench of death. Ember's still hunting, but she's skinny, her ribs sharp under fur. Mira, nursing her son, sees a rival tribe smoke on the horizon. She grabs a spear, but her hands shake from hunger. Ember's kittens, now half grown, scatter rats from the last grain jar, buying Mira a few more days. She whispers thanks to the cat, who ignores her, licking blood from a fresh kill. It's not loyalty, it's survival, and it's darkly funny how much they need each other. Engage with me. Does your cat have a habit that screams, "I'm still a Neolithic pest killer"? Maybe it's the way it stalks your shoelaces or guards its food bowl like it's a granary. Comment below with your cat's wild side and where you're tuning in from. I'm curious who's joining this ancient chaos. Cats are no longer just wild interlopers. They're fixtures in our villages, reshaping our survival and our stories. The pain of famine, disease, and raids binds us, but so does the absurdity of relying on a creature that'd rather nap than nod. What's next? Egypt's about to turn these mousers into gods, and the irony's only getting thicker. Comment your thoughts. Were Mira and her cat's partners, or just roommates from hell? Stay tuned for part 3. Alright folks, we're diving back into the sarcastic, gritty, and utterly absurd tale of how wildcats clawed their way from desert stalkers to the pampered emperors of your living room. We're now in part 3, roughly 6,000 to 4,000 BCE, where the Neolithic world is getting busier, dirtier, and more chaotic. Villages are swelling into proto-cities, agriculture's turning humans into obsessive farmers, and our semi-domesticated cats, those Felis silvestris libica with their smug grins, are cementing their role as humanity's rodent assassins. This isn't a cuddly pet story. It's a survival epic dripping with irony, pain, and the kind of historical madness that makes you glad you're not hoeing barley in a mud hut. Let's pounce! The Fertile Crescent is buzzing now, a patchwork of villages and early towns where humans are doubling down on this farming experiment. Places like Mehrgar in modern Pakistan and Tel Sultan near Jericho are thriving. Well, thriving is generous when you're one locust swarm away from famine. Mud brick houses cluster like hives, granaries brim with wheat and barley, and the air's thick with dust, smoke, and the stench of unwashed bodies. Life's a grind. You sow, you reap, you pray the river doesn't flood or dry up. If it does, your kids are eating dirt and not metaphorically. The pain of survival is a constant gut punch. Disease festers, bones ache from endless labor, and rival tribes are always ready to raid your stash. Cats, those opportunistic furballs, are now village regulars. They're not quite house cats. Think of them as feral roommates who pay rent by killing pests. Their ancestors started this hustle thousands of years ago, drawn to our rodent-infested grain stores. Now, their descendants are leaner, slightly smaller, with coats ranging from tabby stripes to mottled spots, thanks to genetic tweaks that favor tameness. They're still wild at heart though. One wrong move, and you're sporting claw marks that'll get infected faster than you can say no antibiotics. But they're here to stay, because rats and mice are still the bane of every farmer's existence, gnawing through stores that could feed a family for a month. Meet Lyra, a weaver in a bustling village along the Euphrates. She's got a loom made of reeds, a daughter who's always coughing, and a husband who's off trading obsidian blades for salt. Lyra's life is a treadmill of chores, weaving baskets, grinding grain, dodging scorpions that creep into her hut. The village is a maze of narrow alleys, packed with people, goats, and the constant buzz of flies. Famine's a bad memory from 2 seasons ago when half the kids starved, their bodies buried under stones because wood's too scarce for coffins. Disease? Don't get me started. Rat droppings in the grain spread fevers that burn through families like wildfire. Lyra's got a cat. Let's call her Mist, a sleek tabby with eyes like daggers. Mist isn't a pet. She's a one-cat pest control agency. She prowls the granary, a clay-lined pit that's a magnet for rodents. Every night, Mist racks up kills, mice, rats, even a snake once, saving grain that keeps Lyra's daughter alive. In return, Lyra tosses her fish bones from the river or scraps of flatbread. It's not affection, it's a transaction, but Lyra's daughter, barely 5, is smitten. She ties a reed around Mist's neck like a collar, giggling when the cat bats it off. Mist's kittens, born in a corner of the hut, are already learning humans mean food, not danger. Evolution's at work, and it's got a wicked sense of humor. Here's the absurdity. Cats are becoming indispensable, but they're still calling the shots. Unlike dogs, who signed up for the human team like loyal sidekicks, cats are freelancers. They don't herd, guard, or fetch. They just kill what annoys us and nap the rest of the day. Lyra tolerates Mist because she's a walking mousetrap, but trust? Ha! One time, Mist swiped a chunk of Lyra's dinner, earning a thrown sandal and a hiss that said, "I'm here for the rats, not your rules." It's a partnership of convenience, And the irony is that humans think they're in charge, while cats dictate the who. Terms. Let's zoom in on a day in Lyra's village, because the chaos is where the story lives. It's market day, and traders from upriver are bartering pots for grain. The granary's full, but so are the rat nets. Mist and her kin, a half-dozen cats now roam the village, are on patrol, their kills piling up like trophies. Lyra's weaving when she hears a scream. Her daughter's cornered by a stray dog, a mangy thing that wandered in. Mist leaps from nowhere, hissing like a demon, claws out, and the dog bolts. Lyra's grateful, but when she tries to pet Mist, the cat swerves like she's dodging a tax collector. Later, a fire breaks out, a dropped torch in a dry hut. The village scrambles, but Mist's kittens scatter, one lost to the flames. Lyra's daughter weeps, burying the charred body with a pebble. It's absurdly poignant, grieving a cat when human life's so fragile. Now, the bigger picture, because this is a turning point. Agriculture's booming, and with it, cats are spreading like a furry plague. From the Levant to Egypt, Anatolia to the Indus, wherever humans farm, rodents follow, and cats aren't far behind. Archaeological digs, like those at Hasilar in Turkey, show cat bones in trash heaps, their teeth slightly smaller than wild cats, a sign of domestication's creep. Genetic studies, because we love poking at ancient DNA, reveal these cats are diverging fast, their genes favoring docility in varied coats. A black cat here, a spotted one there. Humans are accidentally breeding for aesthetics, because who doesn't want a cool-looking mouser? The pain of survival never lets up. Smallpox is emerging, a gift from living too close to domesticated animals like goats. Cats don't spread it, but their fleas carry other nasties, typhus, plague precursors, that turn a scratch into a death sentence. Lyra's neighbor loses a son to fever, his body swollen with sores. The village blames bad spirits, but it's the rats, and Mist's work is never done. Floods hit too. One bad season, and the Euphrates turns the village to sludge, drowning crops and hopes. Cats climb to rooftops, surviving where humans struggle, their independence a mocking reminder of who's really winning. Here's the historical irony. Cats are sneaking into human culture, and it's hilariously accidental. In Egypt, where the Nile fuels bigger settlements, cats are starting to get noticed. Wall reliefs from 5000 BCE. Okay, we're pushing the timeline, but the roots are here, show felines beside granaries, their forms carved with reverence. Are they gods yet? Not quite, but they're more than mousers. Lyra's village paints cat-like figures on pottery, maybe as luck charms, maybe just art born from boredom. Kids play with kittens, teaching them to chase strings, which accidentally selects for playfulness. It's domestication by vibes, and it's absurd that a creature who ignores you is becoming a symbol. Social dynamics add a sarcastic twist. Villages are hotbeds of drama. Feuds over water rights, stolen tools, or who slept with whose cousin. Cats, oblivious, become social glue. When Lyra's neighbor argues over a broken pot, Mist's kitten stumbles into the fray, tripping over its own paws and breaking the tension. It's not intentional. Cats are just chaos incarnate. But it works, and the friendlier ones breed, their genes spreading. Humans start naming cats, not just Mist, but Flicker, Claw, Shadow, humanizing them despite their disdain. Migration's still a thing. As trade routes grow, obsidian from Anatolia, shells from the Red Sea, cats hitch rides in grain sacks or on rafts. In Egypt, where cities like Hierakonpolis are forming, cats are becoming fixtures. A burial from 5500 BCE shows a cat with a human, its skeleton curled like it's napping for eternity. Affection? Utility? Who knows? But it's ironic that a creature who'd rather ignore us gets a grave. Meanwhile, wildcat populations shrink as humans overhunt their prey, pushing more felines toward villages. It's a cosmic prank. We ruin their world, they move in, let's paint a scene for the pain. A drought hits Lyra's village, the river a trickle, the fields crack like old leather. Rats swarm the granary, bolder now, and Mist's working overtime, her ribs sharp under fur. Lyra's daughter, weak from hunger, clings to a kitten, whispering stories to keep the fear at bay. One night, raiders strike, torches blazing. Mist's yowls wake the village, giving Lyra time to hide her daughter in a grain pit. The fight's brutal, spears, blood, screams. but the cats hold their ground, clawing at intruders. One raider kills Mist's mate, and Lyra's daughter buries him with a reed bracelet, a futile gesture in a world that chews up hope. Engage with me. What's the one thing your cat does that screams, "I'm a Neolithic survivor"? Does it stalk your kitchen like it's guarding a granary, or nap like it's earned a PhD in laziness? Comment below with your cat's ancient antics and where you're watching from. I'm dying to know who's in this feral fan club. Cats are no longer just wild interlopers, they're village MVPs, killing pests and sneaking into our stories. The pain of survival, disease, famine, raids binds us, but so does the absurdity of trusting a creature that'd rather swipe your lunch than thank you. Next up, part 4, where Egypt crowns cats as gods and the irony hits divine levels. Comment your take. Were Lyra and her cat's allies or just stuck in a bad roommate deal? Stay tuned. Alright folks, we're clawing into the final act of this wild, sarcastic, and painfully absurd saga of how wildcats went from stealthy predators to the smug monarchs of your couch. We're now in part 4, roughly 4000 to 2000 BCE, where the Neolithic world is morphing into the Bronze Age. Villages are swelling into cities, agriculture's a full-blown obsession, and our cats, those Felis silvestris libica turned proto-house cats, are no longer just pest control. They're cultural icons, divine symbols, and still the most aloof roommates humanity's ever had. This is a tale of survival's grind, historical irony, and the cosmic joke of worshipping a creature that barely tolerates us. Let's leap in. The Fertile Crescent is now a hub of proto-civilization, with cities like Uruk and Memphis rising from the mud. Egypt's Nile Valley is the star, its floods turning dirt into bread baskets of emmer wheat, barley, and flax. But don't picture a golden age. Life's still a brutal slog. Farmers toil under a scorching sun, their backs breaking for crops that might fail if the Nile misbehaves. Disease festers in crowded alleys. Raiders and bandits lurk beyond the walls. Every granary is a treasure chest, and every rat a thief threatening to starve you out. Survival's a cruel math problem. One bad season equals empty bellies, and empty bellies equal dead kids. Cats are now village VIPs, their domestication nearly complete. They're smaller than their wild ancestors, with coats in every shade, tabby, black, spotted, thanks to human whims and genetic roulette. Their eyes still scream, "I could kill you," but they're more likely to nap than attack. These aren't the pampered Persians of today. They're scrappy, street-smart mousers who've traded desert solitude for a steady gig in human towns. Their job? Slaughter the rodents that swarm grain stores, saving families from the grim reaper of famine. But trust? Ha! They're still cats, loyal to their stomachs, not your dreams. Meet Amara, a potter in a bustling Nileside town around 3000 BCE. Her life's a treadmill, shaping clay into jars, hauling water, and keeping her 2 kids from falling into the river where crocodiles wait like toothy tax collectors. Her husband's a scribe, scratching hieroglyphs for a local chief, but his pay is mostly barley, not gold. The pain? Last year, a plague swept through, leaving Amara's sister in a shallow grave, her body too frail to fight the fever. Rats didn't help, contaminating grain with droppings that spread sickness faster than gossip. Amara's kids are skinny, their coughs a constant worry in a world without doctors. Amara's got a cat, let's call her Sek, after the war goddess, fitting for a feline who treats the granary like a battlefield. Sek's a lean tabby with a scar from a dogfight, her kittens already prowling the alleys. She's no pet, she's a one-cat SWAT team, racking up rodent kills like a serial killer with a quota. Amara leaves fish heads by the pottery kiln, not out of love, but strategy. Sek's too valuable to lose. Her kids adore the kittens, tying papyrus strips for them to chase. But Sek? She'll swipe your hand if you try to pet her. It's a partnership forged in necessity, not cuddles, and the irony is that Amara's half afraid of her own MVP. Let's zoom in on a day in Amara's town, because the chaos is where the story purrs. It's festival time, a rare break from the grind with people bartering bread, beer, and beads. The granary's full, but rats are bolder than ever, gnawing through clay jars like they've got a vendetta. Sek and her kin patrol, their kills piling up in corners. Amara's shaping a pot when a scream echoes. Her son's cornered by a snake near the grain store. Sek pounces, a blur of claws in the snake's toast. Amara's grateful, but Sek just licks her paws, unimpressed. Later, a rival clan raids, aiming for the grain. Sek's yowls wake the town, giving Amara's husband time to grab a spear. The fight's bloody, one kitten's crushed underfoot, but the raiders flee. Amara's daughter buries the kitten with a clay amulet, a gesture absurdly tender in a world that chews up hope. Now, the big picture, because this is where cats go from mousers to myths. Egypt's the epicenter, its cities fueled by the Nile's bounty. Cats aren't just useful, they're sacred. By 3000 BCE, they're linked to deities like Bastet, the goddess of protection and fertility, whose feline form is carved on temple walls. Temples in Bubastis start venerating cats, their images etched on amulets and pots. A burial from 3500 BCE shows a cat with a human, its skeleton curled like it's guarding the afterlife's grain. Affection? Maybe. Or maybe it's just keep the rats away in eternity. The irony? Cats become gods while still ignoring us, their divine status born from killing vermin. The pain of survival is relentless. Smallpox and typhus stalk the streets, spread by fleas and filthy water. Amara's son catches a fever, his skin burning under her trembling hands. Cats don't spread disease, but their fleas do, and one scratch can fester into a death sentence. Floods hit too. The Nile's a fickle friend, drowning fields one year, starving them the next. Amara's town loses half its crop to a bad flood, and the rats swarm like they've been invited. Sek's working overtime, but even she can't stop the hunger that thins the kids' faces. Here's the absurdity. Cats are now cultural heavyweights. In Egypt, they're not just pest control, they're symbols of prosperity. Wealthy families keep cats as status symbols. Nothing says, I'm rich, like feeding a creature that doesn't need you. Artifacts from Memphis show cats on jewelry, their eyes inlaid with lapis. Kids carve cat figurines, priests mutter prayers to feline spirits. It's mythology gone wild, and it's hilarious that a creature who'd rather nap than bow is deified. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, cats are less divine but still vital. Their bones in Ur's trash heaps showing smaller jaws, a domestication hallmark. Social dynamics add a sarcastic twist. Cities mean hierarchy, chiefs, priests, and peasants like Amara scrapping for scraps. Cats, oblivious, become social glue. When Amara's neighbor fights over a broken jar, Sek's kitten stumbles in, chasing its tail, and the argument dissolves in laughter. It's not diplomacy, it's chaos with whiskers. But it works, and friendlier cats breed, their genes spreading. Names like Sek, Nefer, and Mao become common, humanizing the unhumanizable. Migration keeps the feline empire growing. Trade routes, Nile to Red Sea, Mesopotamia to Indus, carry cats in grain shipments. In Anatolia, sites like Ashiklu Hoyuk show cat bones with human refuse, their teeth tinier than wild cats. Genetic studies confirm domestic cats are spreading, their DNA mixing as humans trade. It's a feline soap opera. Egyptian cats mingle with Levantine ones, creating the mutts we pamper today. Wildcat populations shrink as humans overhunt their prey, pushing more felines to cities. Cosmic joke. We trash their world, they crash ours. Let's paint a final scene. Amara's town is thriving, relatively, until a drought hits. The Nile a trickle, the fields dust. Rats raid the last grain jars, and Sek's gaunt, her eyes fierce as she hunts. Amara's daughter, weak from hunger, clings to a kitten, whispering tales of Bastet to stay brave. One night, jackals creep close, drawn by the granary's scent. Sek leads the town's cats in a yowling standoff, their cries waking the guards. The jackals retreat, but a panicked neighbor kills a kitten, mistaking it for a foe. Amara's daughter buries it with a reed charm, a futile act in a world that laughs at sentiment. Engage with me. What's the one trait in your cat that screams, I'm a Bronze Age survivor? Does it guard your kitchen like a granary or stare like it's channeling Bastet? Comment below with your cat's ancient vibe and where you're watching from. I'm curious who's in this feline cult. Cats are no longer wild, they're Felis catus, molded by human grain and human chaos. The pain of survival, disease, famine, raids, forged this bond, but so did the absurdity of worshipping a creature that doesn't care. The irony? Nobody planned it. Cats became our gods and roommates through a sarcastic twist of fate, born in the muckshu. Imagine this. You're stumbling through a misty prehistoric forest, your stomach gnawing at itself like a rabid wolf, armed with nothing but a sharpened stick and a prayer to whatever angry god invented hunger. Suddenly, crashing through the underbrush comes a 500-pound nightmare on hooves, tusks like daggers, eyes blazing with pure, unfiltered rage, ready to turn you into a human kebab. That's not some B-movie monster, that's the wild boar, your bacon's psychopathic ancestor. And guess what? Our idiot forebears decided to tango with it anyway. Welcome to the twisted tale of how pigs went from feral fury to farm favorites. A saga soaked in blood, sweat, and enough absurdity to make you question human evolution. Stick around, because this isn't just history. It's a sarcastic sprint through the nightmare of survival, where every oink hides a scream. And hey, if you've ever dodged a bad decision like our ancestors did with these beasts, drop a comment below. What's the wildest risk you've taken for a meal? Oh, the wild boar, Sus scrofa, if you want to sound fancy while running for your life. Picture the dawn of humanity, way back in the Pleistocene era, when the world was a frozen hellscape of ice ages and megafauna that could stomp you flat. These boars weren't the cute pink porkers lounging in mud baths today. They were apex survivors, roaming from the dense forests of Eurasia to the scrublands of North Africa, evolving over millions of years into a machine of destruction. Fossils tell us they branched off from ancient even-toed ungulates around 20 million years ago, but by the time Homo sapiens showed up, say 300,000 years ago in Africa, migrating out like overconfident tourists, the boars had perfected their craft, tusks curving like scimitars, up to a foot long, capable of goring a lion, or more relevantly, a hapless hunter. They weighed up to 700 pounds in some subspecies, with bristles like wire brushes and a temper that made volcanoes look chill, and their behavior, pure chaos. Solitary males charging at anything that moved, sounders of females and piglets forming roving gangs that could strip the landscape bare. They were omnivores on steroids, rooting up tubers with their shovel-like snouts, devouring nuts, fruits, insects, small mammals, and the occasional corpse if it was handy. In the wild, survival was a brutal lottery. Dodge predators like wolves, tigers, and humans, while scrounging in a world where famine was just a bad season away. Now, enter our ancestors, those wide-eyed primates who thought fire was the pinnacle of tech. Early human interactions with wild boars weren't romantic meet-cutes, they were desperate brawls for calories. Archaeological digs in places like the Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania or the caves of Lascaux in France show us the evidence. Boar bones cracked open for marrow, tusks fashioned into tools or ornaments, cave paintings depicting hunts that look like suicide, missions. Imagine it, a band of hunter-gatherers, half-starved after a lean winter, spotting a boar rooting in the undergrowth. The pain of survival kicks in, ribs showing, kids crying, the elder muttering about spirits. Do you sneak away or do you charge? The absurdity hits when you realize these folks chose the latter over and over, spears tipped with flint, traps made from pits lined with stakes, primitive but effective enough to occasionally bag one. But oh, the cost. Boars don't go down easy. They turn and fight, slashing legs, disemboweling the unlucky. Ancient skeletons unearthed in Europe show healed gashes from tusks, proof that survival meant limping back to camp with a story and a scar. And for what? Meat that was tough as leather but packed with fat. Precious, life-saving fat in a world without supermarkets. Fat meant energy to outrun the next threat, to nurse the weak. But irony alert, that same fat would later doom pigs to domestication, because who wouldn't want a walking larder? Fast forward to the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, when the world thawed and humans got ideas. The Neolithic Revolution, fancy term for stop wandering and plant some damn seeds, kicked off in the Fertile Crescent, that arc of land from modern-day Iraq to Egypt. Wild boars were everywhere, thriving in the oak forests and river valleys. Humans, settling into villages of mud huts, started experimenting. Why chase the beast when you could lure it closer? Early evidence from sites like Sayonu in Turkey, dating to 9000 BC, shows boar bones mixed with human refuse, signs of opportunistic feeding. Picture the scene. A scrappy farmer tosses scraps over the fence, and a curious young boar wanders in, too naive to know better. Absurd, right? These animals that could kill you were now snuffling around your trash heap like oversized raccoons. But survival's pain drove it. Droughts withered crops, floods drowned fields, and starvation loomed like a shadow. Boars, with their ability to eat anything, and I mean anything, roots, garbage, even poison ivy without a hitch, became accidental allies. They scavenged pests from fields, fertilized soil with their droppings, and provided meat without the full hunt's risk. Yet, the nightmare lingered. A boar turning feral in your village could rampage, destroying stores or mauling children. Historical absurdity at its finest, befriending your potential murderer for a shot at not dying hungry. Genetic studies today peel back the sarcasm even further. Mitochondrial DNA from ancient bones reveals that domestication wasn't a single eureka moment, but a messy, multi-continental affair. In the Near East, around 9000 BC, humans started selectively breeding less aggressive boars. Those juveniles captured during hunts, raised in pens, their tusks blunted or removed in crude surgeries that must have been agony for both parties. Imagine the first pig farmer, a sunburnt Mesopotamian, wrestling a squealing piglet into a wattle enclosure, cursing as it bites his hand, all while locusts devour his barley. The pain of trial and error, pigs escaping, breeding back with wild kin, creating hybrids that were meaner than before. But persistence paid off. Over generations, domesticated pigs emerged, smaller tusks, floppier ears, spotted coats instead of camouflage stripes. They reproduced faster, litters ballooning from 4 to 6 in the wild to 8 to 12 under human care. And the irony? These early pigs weren't pets, they were walking apocalypse insurance. In times of war or plague, oh, and there were plenty, the pig could be slaughtered quick, its meat salted or smoked to last months. But eat the wrong part raw, and hello, trichinosis, a wormy hell that twisted your guts like a bad joke from the gods. Meanwhile, across the globe in ancient China, a parallel absurdity unfolded around 8000 BC. In the Yangtze River Valley, wild boars, local subspecies with even fiercer reputations, met rice farming settlers. Sites like Jiahu yield pig bones in ceremonial burials, hinting at cultural reverence mixed with utility. Pigs symbolize fertility, their rotund bodies mirroring prosperous harvests. But the nightmare? Floods from the Yellow River drowned villages, forcing survivors to rebuild, and pigs adapted, eating rice husks and human waste in a symbiotic gross-out. Genetic turnover shows these Asian pigs hybridized too, their DNA mingling with wild boars, creating resilient breeds. Humans, in their infinite wisdom, started penning them in bamboo sties, feeding them kitchen scraps, turning predators into dependents. Survival's pain echoed. A pig disease outbreak could wipe out a family's wealth overnight, leading to famine where kids ate bark to fill bellies. Yet, the sarcasm shines. Pigs became status symbols, sacrificed in rituals to appease ancestors who probably laughed at the whole setup. As domestication spread, cultural absurdities piled on like layers of bacon grease. In ancient Egypt, around 5000 BC, pigs were both boon and curse. Herodotus, that gossipy Greek historian, noted how Egyptians viewed pigs as unclean, associating them with Set, the chaos god who murdered Osiris. Yet, farmers raised them on the Nile's fringes, their meat feeding the lower classes while pharaohs dined on beef. Irony: pigs helped build pyramids by providing cheap protein to laborers, but touching one during certain festivals meant ritual purification. Survival's bite? Swineherds lived on society's edges, marginalized like their charges, facing Nile floods that swept away herds or crocodiles that snatched piglets. Further west in Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh weaves boars into myths, wild beasts slain by heroes symbolizing man's conquest over nature's fury. But real life was grimmer. Sumerian tablets record pig taxes, where failing to deliver meant debt slavery, a nightmare chain where one bad litter doomed generations. By 4000 BC, pigs hitchhiked with human migrations, spreading to Europe via Anatolian farmers. In the forests of Germany and France, local wild boars, bigger, hairier, hybridized with imports, creating the genetic mess we see today. Studies from Oxford show that early European domestic pigs carried Near Eastern DNA, but within centuries it was overwritten by local boar genes through escaped pigs breeding wild. Absurd, isn't it? Humans domesticate an animal, only for nature to flip the script. The pain. Celtic tribes hunted these hybrids for sport and sustenance, but a botched hunt meant death. Tusks ripping thighs, infections festering without antibiotics. Yet, pigs integrated into daily hell. Acorn-fed in oak groves, their lard lighting lamps in drafty huts during endless winters. And let's not forget the religious roller coaster. In Crete's Minoan civilization around 3000 BC, pigs were sacred to the great goddess, sacrificed in bloody rites where priestesses danced amid squeals, blood soaking the earth to ensure fertility. But flip to the Levant, and emerging Semitic cultures began shunning pork. Early hints of taboos that would define Judaism and Islam. Why? Some say ecological sense. Pigs compete with humans for food in arid lands, rooting up scarce crops. Others whisper disease fears, tapeworms turning brains to Swiss cheese. The irony stings. An animal that saved countless lives through famines became a symbol of impurity, forcing adherents to forgo its fatty salvation while neighbors feasted. As we wrap this first leg of our porcine nightmare, from snarling wild boars to penned proto-pigs, think about the sheer stupidity and grit. Humans, against all odds, turned a killer into a companion, all while battling starvation, beasts, and each other. But the story's just warming up. Next, we'll dive into how these oinkers conquered empires and sparked taboos that still divide us. If this tale of tusked terror has you hooked or horrified, smash that like button and comment. Would you have dared domesticate a wild boar back then or stuck to berries? Tell me your survival strategy. I read every one. Alright, buckle up, because we're diving back into the muddy, bloody, downright ridiculous saga of how pigs went from feral terrors to farmyard MVPs. If you thought the first chapter was a wild ride, this one's a full-on stampede through the absurdity of ancient civilizations, where pigs became both saviors and scapegoats in a world that chewed up humans and spat them out. Picture this. It's 4000 BC, and you're a farmer in a world where a bad harvest means your kids eat dirt, a rogue pig could trash your village, and some priest is screaming about omens in the entrails. How did we turn these tusked lunatics into bacon factories? Grab a snack, preferably not pork if you're squeamish, and let's unravel this tale of survival, irony, and enough historical madness to make you glad you're watching this from a couch. Oh, and drop a comment. What's the dumbest thing you've done for a good meal? Let's see who's got a story to rival these ancient lunatics. As the Neolithic dust settled around 4000 BC, pigs were no longer just wild boars crashing humanity's party. They were reluctant roommates in the chaotic experiment of civilization. From the Fertile Crescent to the foggy hills of Europe, these snuffling beasts were being molded by humans who were, frankly, barely holding it together themselves. The pain of survival was relentless. Floods drowned crops, winters froze toes off, and raiders burned villages for fun. Pigs, though, were the ultimate wingmen in this nightmare. Their superpower? Eating literally anything. Spoiled grain, kitchen slop, even human waste in a pinch. Yeah, it's gross, but starvation's grosser. Sites like Tel Halula in Syria, dating to 6000 BC, show pig pens next to human houses, bones piled high with cut marks from crude flint knives. These weren't pampered pets, they were walking pantries. A family could raise a litter, slaughter one pig, and have enough meat and fat to survive a lean season. But the absurdity? These same pigs could turn on you, escapees trashing barley fields or goring a kid who got too close. Imagine the stress. You're domesticating a beast that could domesticate you into an early grave. Now, let's zoom to ancient China, where pigs were pulling double duty as food and flex. By 5000 BC, the young Shao culture along the Yellow River was all in on pigs. Archaeological digs at Bampo village reveal pig skulls buried under house floors. Ritual offerings to ancestors who probably didn't care, but got them anyway. Why pigs? Their round, fat bodies screamed prosperity in a world where full belly was a flex bigger than a gold chain. Farmers fed them rice, chaff, and millet scraps, turning waste into wealth. But here's the nightmare. The Yellow River was a moody jerk, flooding villages without warning. One bad monsoon, and your pig herd swimming away, or worse, drowning in the sty you spent months building. Genetic evidence from Zhejiang sites shows these pigs were fully domesticated, their DNA diverging from wild boars, smaller, fatter, less likely to maul you. But survival's pain never quit. A single pig plague could tank a village's food supply, leaving families to boil roots while praying for mercy. And yet, the sarcasm drips. Pigs were so vital that Chinese characters for home and family literally incorporate the pig radical. Your house wasn't complete without a squealer in the yard. Meanwhile, in Europe, pigs were rewriting the script of survival with a Celtic twist. By 3500 BC, tribes in modern-day Germany and France were herding pigs into oak forests for pannage, letting them gorge on acorns like furry vacuum cleaners. This wasn't just efficient, it was genius in a world where every calorie was a battle. Acorn-fed pork was rich, flavorful, and fatty enough to fuel warriors through endless tribal feuds. Sites like Stonehenge, yes, that's Stonehenge, have pig bones from feasts dated to 3000 BC, showing these animals were central to blow-up parties after raising those massive stones. But the irony? These feasts often followed brutal raids where pigs were stolen alongside weapons and wives. Survival meant guarding your herd like gold, because losing them wasn't just hunger, it was humiliation. And the absurdity ramps up. European pigs, originally imported from the Near East, kept breeding with local wild boars, creating hybrids that were like the worst of both worlds, tame enough to pen, wild enough to charge. Ancient Celtic sagas whisper of boar hunts where heroes like Cuchulainn faced beasts so fierce they'd make a grizzly flinch. Real life wasn't so poetic. A tusk to the gut, and you're dead, no bard to sing your tale. Now, let's talk religion, because nothing screams historical absurdity like turning pigs into gods or demons. In the Aegean, the Minoans on Crete were pig-obsessed by 3000 BC. Their frescoes show boars in sacred processions, and Knossos digs reveal piglet skeletons in altars sacrificed to fertility goddesses. Imagine the scene, a priestess in a flouncy skirt, slashing a pig's throat while chanting, blood soaking the stone, all to ensure the olive harvest didn't flop. Survival's pain meant every ritual was a gamble. Kill a pig, maybe the gods smile. Skip it, and you're cursed with locusts. But flip to the Levant, and pigs were becoming persona non grata. Early Canaanite texts, around 2500 BC, hint at pork avoidance, a precursor to Jewish and later Islamic taboos. Why the hate? Some scholars argue ecology. Pigs ate crops humans needed in desert climates, unlike goats that grazed on scrub. Others point to disease. Trichinosis from undercooked pork could kill a village faster than a rival tribe. The irony is brutal. An animal that saved millions from starvation was now a cultural outcast, its mere presence defiling. Farmers in Judea still raised pigs for trade with foreigners, but they were shunned, living like outlaws in their own land. Then there's Mesopotamia, where pigs were both cash cows and bureaucratic headaches. Sumerian clay tablets from 2500 BC detail pig taxes. Yup, you owed the king a cut of your herd. Fail to pay, and you're hauling bricks as a debt slave, your family eating dust while pigs grunt in royal pens. These records show pigs were currency, traded like gold nuggets. But the nightmare? A single drought could force you to slaughter your whole herd just to survive, wiping out years of breeding. And let's not forget the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation myth, where wild boars symbolize chaos, slain by Marduk to bring order. Real-world farmers probably wished it was that poetic when a boar escaped and trampled their irrigation ditches, turning fields to mud. Survival was a tightrope. Pigs were wealth, but one bad season or raid, and you're begging for scraps. Across the globe, pigs were also shaping warfare. Yes, warfare. In ancient India, around 2000 BC, Vedic texts mention pigs as camp followers, scavenging battlefields for fallen soldiers' remains. Gross, but practical. Armies marched on their stomachs, and pigs provided portable protein. Indus Valley digs at Harappa show pig bones in military outposts, suggesting they were raised on site to feed soldiers. But the absurdity? These same pigs could turn a camp into chaos, breaking into grain stores or spreading disease in cramped quarters. Survival's pain meant generals had to play pig herder, a job nobody signed up for. And in Europe, pigs were loot. Raiding tribes like the Gauls targeted herds, knowing a stolen sow could feed a warband for weeks. The irony stings. Pigs, the ultimate survival tool, made you a target in a world where everyone was one bad day from collapse. By 2000 BC, pigs were global superstars, but not without drama. In Egypt, the pork paradox deepened. While elites sniffed at pigs as unclean, workers building temples and pyramids lived on pork, their bones found in mass quantities at sites like Amarna. Why? It was cheap, calorie-dense, and pigs thrived in Nile marshes eating reeds and fish scraps. But the nightmare? Swineherds faced floods, crocodiles, and social stigma, their labor feeding the masses while priests called them filthy. And in China, pigs were now so central that oracle bones used for divination were often pig scapulae, etched with questions about harvests or wars. The sarcasm hits hard. You're carving prayers into the bones of the animal that's keeping you alive, hoping it'll convince the gods to stop screwing you over. As we close this second chapter of our porcine epic, the picture's clear. Pigs were humanity's chaotic lifeline, fueling empires, rituals, and wars while dodging taboos and taxes. But the story's far from over. Next, we'll explore how pigs powered Rome's legions, sparked medieval revolts, and became the ultimate symbol of greed and gluttony. If this tale of muddy survival and cosmic irony has you hooked, hit that like button and comment. Would you have raised pigs in these brutal times, or told civilization to shove it and gone back to hunting? Share your take. I'm reading every wild story. Here we go, plunging back into the snorting, squealing chaos of history's pig parade, where these grubby beasts went from survival sidekicks to the grease-slicked backbone of empires, and the punching bag for humanity's weirdest hang-ups. Picture this. It's 1000 BC, and you're a dirt-caked farmer or a pompous priest in a world where pigs are both your lifeline and your curse. One day, they're saving your village from starvation. The next, they're banned by holy decree or fueling a riot because someone's hog ate the king's grain. This is the third act of how pigs clawed their way from wild boars to farmyard fame, dripping with irony, historical lunacy, and the raw pain of survival. Ready for a wild ride through Rome's bloody feast, medieval muck, and religious shade? Stick with me, and let's see how these oinkers shape the world while dodging the butcher's knife. Oh, and comment below, what's the most ridiculous food rule you've ever followed? Let's match the absurdity of these ancient pig haters. By 1000 BC, pigs were the unsung heroes of a world stitching itself into empires, from the Tiber River to the Indus Valley. In Rome's early days, think pre-Republic, when it was just a muddy village of toga-wearing wannabes, pigs were the ultimate flex. Archaeological digs at the Forum show pig bones galore, roasted and cracked open for marrow, feeding everyone from shepherds to proto-senators. Why? Pigs were cheap to raise, thrived on scraps, and delivered fat like nobody's business, crucial in a world where olive oil was pricier than your average slave. Roman farmers let pigs roam the city's edges, gobbling acorns and garbage, turning waste into walking lard. But the nightmare? Urban pigs were a menace. Picture a 200-pound sow charging through Rome's muddy streets, knocking over market stalls or rooting up a noble's garden. Laws from the 12 Tables around 450 BC fined owners for pig trespass, because apparently that was a thing. Survival's pain hit hard. A lost pig could mean your family's winter rations, but keeping one in check meant wrestling a beast that didn't respect your vibe. Zoom to the Mediterranean, and pigs were fueling conquest. As Rome expanded, its legions marched with herds trailing behind. Mobile meat lockers for soldiers hacking through Gaul or Carthage. Military camps in Spain and Britain, dated to 200 BC, show pig pens alongside latrines, because nothing says civilized like eating pork next to your sewage. A single sow could produce a litter of 10, enough to feed a century of troops for weeks. But the irony? These same pigs could tank a campaign. If disease swept the herd, swine fever was a known killer, soldiers went hungry, morale crashed, and barbarians smelled weakness. And let's not ignore the absurdity. Roman generals, obsessed with omens, sometimes sacrificed pigs before battle, reading their guts for divine approval. Spoiler, the gods didn't care, and a bad reading could spook an army into retreat. Survival meant gambling on a pig's innards while dodging spears and dysentery. Meanwhile, in the Near East, the pork taboo was hardening like concrete. By 1000 BC, Leviticus in the Hebrew Bible declared pigs unclean, banning them from Jewish diets. Why? Theories abound. Pigs ate human food, competed with crops, carried parasites like tapeworms that turned your insides into a horror show. But the real sting? Neighboring cultures, like the Philistines, were chowing down on pork, their middens overflowing with pig bones. It was identity politics via diet. We're not them. The pain of survival meant Jewish farmers in Judea couldn't rely on pigs as a famine buffer, forcing them to lean on goats and sheep, which were pickier eaters in a dry land. The sarcasm drips. An animal that could have saved countless lives was sidelined because of cultural flexing, while priests preached purity over practicality. Still, some snuck pork on the down low. Pig bones show up in secret stashes at sites like Lachish, proof that hunger trumped holiness when push came to shove. Across the globe, India's relationship with pigs was a roller coaster of utility and taboo. Vedic texts from 1200 BC praise pigs as sacrificial offerings, their fat burned to appease gods like Indra. But by 500 BC, emerging Jainism and Buddhism started sidelining meat, pigs included, pushing vegetarian ideals. Meanwhile, lower castes and tribal groups kept raising pigs, their villages dotted with sties of scrappy, black-coated breeds. Harappan sites show pig pens near granaries, hinting at their role as pest control, eating rats and bugs that threatened stored grain. But the nightmare? Monsoons could flood pens, drowning herds, or wild boars could sneak in, breeding hybrids that trashed fields. The absurdity lies in the caste system's irony. Pigs were vital for the poor, yet elites scorned them as filthy, creating a divide where survival tools became social stains. Fast forward to the early Middle Ages, around 500 AD, and Europe was a pig paradise, or pig purgatory, depending on your luck. The collapse of Rome left a patchwork of kingdoms where pigs were the ultimate survival hack. In Anglo-Saxon England, peonage rights let peasants drive pigs into forests to fatten on acorns, a practice etched into charters from Kent to Wessex. A fat pig could feed a family through winter or be traded for a sword, currency with a pulse. But the pain? Forests were contested, lords demanded a cut of every herd, and poaching someone else's pig could cost you a hand. Archaeological sites like West Stowe show pig bones dominating food waste, proof of their starring role. Yet, the absurdity, pigs were so valuable that disputes over them sparked feuds. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle mentions a 7th century brawl over stolen swine escalating to village burnings. Imagine dying because your neighbor's pig ate your cabbages, peak medieval drama. In the Islamic world, post-600 AD, pigs faced a new ban as the Quran echoed Jewish taboos, labeling pork haram. But here's the historical twist. Pigs didn't vanish. In Al-Andalus, Muslim-ruled Spain, Christian and Jewish communities raised pigs under special taxes, their herds feeding non-Muslims while fueling black market bacon trades. Cordoba's markets circa 900 AD have pig bone evidence despite the ban, hinting at sneaky deals in back alleys. The nightmare. Tax collectors could seize herds for unpaid dues, and religious zealots occasionally slaughtered pigs to purify villages, leaving farmers destitute. The irony burns. An animal banned for spiritual reasons still greased the wheels of commerce, proving survival trumped dogma when bellies growled. China, ever the pig champion, took it to another level by 800 AD. The Tang dynasty's economy leaned hard on pork. Tax records show millions of pigs raised annually, feeding bustling cities like Chang'an. Pig farmers used rice bran and fish guts, turning waste into wealth. But the pain? Rebellions like the Anlushan in 755 AD trashed farmlands, killing herds and leaving survivors to scavenge ruins. The absurdity lies in the cultural obsession. Poets wrote odes to pigs, their plumpness symbolizing prosperity, while emperors gifted pork to loyal generals. Imagine a warlord getting a gilded pig carcass as a thank you, only to lose it to bandits on the road home. Survival meant guarding your pigs like gold, because in Tang China, they basically were. Pigs also starred in medieval Europe's dark comedy of feasts and famines. By 1000 AD, monasteries in France and Germany ran pig farms, their monks perfecting curing techniques, early bacon and ham salted to last years. Charlemagne himself, crowned Holy Roman Emperor in 800 AD, ordered estates to keep pig herds for tax payments. But the nightmare? Viking raids targeted these herds, knowing a stolen sow could feed a longship crew. And disease, swine erysipelas could wipe out a monastery stock, forcing monks to pray over empty plates. The irony? Pigs, symbols of gluttony in Christian sermons, were the church's economic backbone, funding cathedrals with their fat. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, written later, mock greedy friars as pig-like, yet those same friars relied on pork to survive lean winters. By the late Middle Ages, pigs were sparking revolts. In England, the 1381 Peasants' Revolt saw serfs rioting over taxes, including levies on pigs. One chronicler records a lord's pig herd slaughtered in protest, the meat distributed to starving villagers. Survival's pain was raw. Peasants raised pigs to pay rent, only to see lords feast while they scraped by. The absurdity? Pigs, the poor man's wealth, became rebellion fuel, bacon as a middle finger to the elite. Across Europe, swineherd was a job for outcasts, yet their pigs fed kings. Talk about a cosmic joke. As we wrap this third act of our porky epic, pigs stand as both saviors and troublemakers, powering armies, defying taboos, and sparking revolts while humanity stumbled through history's muck. But the story's not done. Next, we'll see how pigs sailed to new worlds, fueled revolutions, and became the ultimate love-hate icon. If this tale of greasy survival and religious shade has you hooked, smash that like button and comment. Would you have defied a pork ban for a taste, or played it safe with lentils? Spill your survival strategy. I'm reading everyone. Here we are, charging into the final act of our snorting, squealing saga, how pigs went from wild boar nightmares to the farmyard darlings we know today, with a side of historical lunacy and survival's gut punch. Picture this. It's the dawn of the modern era, and pigs are no longer just food. They're global travelers, revolution fuel, and the poster child for humanity's love-hate obsession with bacon. From sailing with Columbus to sparking industrial greed, these oinkers have seen it all. Empires rise, taboos crumble, and entire economies built on their greasy backs. This is a tale of exploration, exploitation, and enough irony to choke a hog. Ready for the grand finale of this absurd, bloody journey? Hang tight and let's see how pigs conquered the world while dodging the slaughterhouse. Oh, and comment below. What's the wildest food you've eaten to survive a tough spot? Let's see if you can top the madness of pig history. As the Middle Ages faded around 1400 AD, pigs were about to catch a ride on history's wildest road trip. Enter the Age of Exploration, where European powers like Spain and Portugal decided to sail off the map, dragging pigs along for the ride. Christopher Columbus, that guy who got lost but claimed he found paradise, packed pigs on his 1493 voyage to the Americas. Why? They were the ultimate survival kit, compact, omnivorous, and capable of multiplying faster than your cousin's pyramid scheme. Spanish ships dumped pigs on Caribbean islands like Hispaniola, where they went feral, breeding like roaches and devouring native crops. By 1500, Hernán Cortés was herding pigs through Mexico, their meat fueling his conquest of the Aztecs. Archaeological digs in Tulum show pig bones alongside Spanish armor, proof these grunters were conquistadors' secret weapons. But the nightmare? These feral pigs trashed ecosystems, eating turtle eggs and rooting up indigenous fields, starving out native peoples. The irony stings. Pigs helped Europeans claim the New World, while screwing over everyone else, turning paradise into a pig pen. Across the Atlantic, pigs were rewriting Europe's economy. By the 1500s, the rise of mercantilism meant pigs were big business. In England, enclosures turned common lands into private farms, and pigs became cash machines. Wealthy landowners raised massive herds, feeding them barley and peas to fatten them for market. London's Smithfield Market, by 1600, was a pork powerhouse, with thousands of pigs slaughtered weekly, their fat rendering into candles and soap. But survival's pain hit the poor hardest. Kicked off communal lands, peasants lost their pig herds, forced to work as hired hands or starve. The absurdity? Ballads from the time lament the loss of our swine, while the nobles feasted on hams in manor halls. Meanwhile, in Germany, the Black Forest became a pig-breeding hub, producing hams so prized they were traded like fine wine. Yet, disease like swine fever could wipe out a season's herd, leaving farmers bankrupt and villages hungry. Survival meant gambling everything on a pig's health. Talk about high-stakes bacon. In the Americas, pigs were reshaping colonies. By the 1600s, English settlers in Virginia relied on pigs to survive brutal winters, letting them roam forests to fatten on chestnuts. Jamestown records show colonists eating pork when crops failed, but the nightmare? Native Powhatan tribes saw their hunting grounds overrun by feral hogs, sparking conflicts that turned bloody. The irony? Pigs, meant to secure colonies, fueled wars with locals as settlers prioritized pork over peace. Further south, in Brazil's sugar plantations, African slaves raised pigs on scraps, their meat a rare protein source in a diet of manioc gruel. But the pain was raw. Slaves faced whips if a pig escaped, and tropical diseases like foot and mouth could decimate herds, leaving workers to face starvation or worse, their master's wrath. Pigs were survival, but survival came with chains. By the 1700s, pigs were global superstars, but religious taboos kept throwing shade. In the Ottoman Empire, pork was haram, yet Christian and Jewish communities in Istanbul raised pigs under heavy taxes, their meat smuggled in secret markets. Excavations in Thessaloniki show pig bones hidden in non-Muslim quarters, proof of underground bacon deals. The absurdity? Muslim authorities sometimes turned a blind eye, knowing pork taxes fattened their coffers. Survival meant playing both sides. Pigs were contraband, but money talked. In contrast, China's Qing dynasty leaned hard into pork, with millions of pigs raised in Jiangsu's rice paddies, their manure fertilizing fields. But the nightmare? Taiping Rebellion in the 1850s slaughtered herds alongside humans, leaving survivors to scavenge in war-torn ruins. The sarcasm drips. Pigs, symbols of abundance, became famine's grim reminder when empires crumbled. The Industrial Revolution, kicking off around 1800, turned pigs into cogs in a capitalist machine. In England, new breeds like the Yorkshire pig were engineered for maximum meat, bigger, fatter, and ready for the slaughterhouse. Cities like Manchester became pork processing hubs, with factories churning out sausages and bacon for urban workers. Chicago, by the 1860s, earned the title Hog Butcher for the World, its stockyards slaughtering millions annually, thanks to railroads and refrigerated cars. Upton Sinclair's The Jungle exposed the horror. Pigs and workers alike ground up in filthy, blood-soaked conditions. The pain? Immigrants toiled in slaughterhouses for pennies, risking life and limb, while tycoons got rich off bacon. The irony? Pigs, once survival's heroes, now fueled industrial greed, their lives as disposable as the workers who carved them up. Pigs also sparked cultural wars. In the US, the 1800s saw pork as a patriotic flex. Bacon and ham were American foods, while religious groups like Seventh-day Adventists pushed vegetarianism, calling pork a sin. Meanwhile, in the South, enslaved African Americans used pigs to resist, secretly raising hogs to trade for goods or sabotage masters' herds. The absurdity? A pig could be freedom's currency or a master's profit, depending on who held the knife. In Europe, pigs fueled class divides. French aristocrats dined on delicate pork loins, while peasants ate offal, the guts and scraps. Revolutionary pamphlets from 1789 mocked nobles as pigs gorging on France's wealth, turning the animal into a symbol of excess. Survival's pain meant eating what you could, while the rich hogged the best cuts. By the 1900s, pigs were at the heart of science and scandal. Selective breeding produced pigs like the Hampshire, tailored for lean bacon to suit modern tastes. But the nightmare? Factory farms crammed pigs into pens, diseases like hog cholera spreading like wildfire. In 1918, the Spanish flu, linked to pig farms in Kansas, killed millions, hinting at the zoonotic risks of crowding animals. The irony? Pigs, humanity's oldest allies, could also be its deadliest vectors. Meanwhile, cultural battles rage. India's partition in 1947 saw pork banned in Muslim areas, while Hindu regions shunned beef, leaving pigs as a tense middle ground. In China, Mao's Great Leap Forwards in the 1950s pushed collectivized pig farming, but mismanagement led to mass starvation, with pigs slaughtered to meet quotas while people ate grass. Survival's cruelty was stark. Pigs died to prop up propaganda while millions perished. Today, pigs are everywhere, over 1 billion worldwide, from Iowa's mega farms to Vietnam's backyard sties. They're the world's most eaten meat, with global pork consumption hitting 120 million tons annually. But the absurdity persists. Factory farms pump pigs with antibiotics, creating superbugs, while vegan movements demonize pork as unethical. The pain? Small farmers struggle against corporate giants, and pigs live in cages barely bigger than their bodies. Yet, the irony shines. Pigs remain humanity's survival hack, their DNA closer to ours than you'd like to think. From medical research, pig hearts and human transplants, to culinary obsession, bacon memes, flooding X, they're still our chaotic partners in a messy world. As we close this epic, pigs stand as history's ultimate survivors, outlasting empires, taboos, and revolutions, all while feeding humanity through its darkest hours. From snarling boars to factory-farmed bacon, they've been our mirror. Resourceful, flawed, and a little unhinged, this tale of tusks, greed, and survival proves one thing. We're all just pigs in the mud, trying to make it through the nightmare of history. If this journey through pork's wild past has you hooked, hit that like button and comment. Would you raise pigs today or ditch meat for the vegan life? Share your take. I'm reading every juicy story. Imagine a shaggy, impatient creature that refused to be a pack mule, then taught whole peoples to gallop, loot, legislate, and draft complicated honorific titles on the backs of other nations' tax receipts. Welcome to the horse, the inconvenient co-conspirator of every empire that didn't have walls. They arrived in stories like ambiguous relatives, part gift, part calamity, on the horizon of the steppe. For thousands of years, the open grass asked for one thing: movement. Movement solved hunger, movement solved matchmaking, movement solved revenge. The grass didn't care what you were, the horse did. A human who learned to ride fast enough and aim well enough discovered the world could be rearranged like tents after a storm. Suddenly, mobility was not just a matter of survival. It was a moral hazard with stirrups. Picture the earliest riding. People hunched like grim librarians over a warm, breathing animal that smelled of hay, dust, and the unromantic urgency of biological necessity. Riding began as a matter of convenience. You could go farther, faster, ferry milk and children to greener patches. But convenience has an impatient cousin called ambition. In the ancient world, ambition signed its name with a spear and a bridle. A man who could ride onto an enemy's granary and be gone before the enemy had time to bake a loaf was a man who, by accident or design, became a legislator of terror. Before horses were useful for empire building, there were chariots, luxurious, fragile, ceremonial, and very loud on gravel. Chariots were the aristocrats' transport, impressive but limited, like a sports car with no shock absorbers. It took a while for humans to graduate from the noisy vanity of wheels to the intimate, indispensable terror of mounted cavalry. The shift is the sort of small technical revolution that rewires societies, from bogged-in gods of war to a nomadic theorem. If you can run at your enemy and shoot while doing so, then you can outmaneuver any slow bureaucracy that still insists on marching in columns and folding flags at noon. What the horse offered beyond speed was a reorganization of time. For a settled farming community, time is a schedule of sowing, growing, and praying for rain. For the rider, time is a series of choices measured in horizons and wind direction. The horse taught its owners to think in leeways and returns. A rider's calendar mixed seasons with the precise cruelty of raids. You could be gone a month and return with a herd, a bride, and a bureaucratic problem in someone else's city. Those were the ingredients of empire: resources, alliances, and administrative paperwork that other people had not planned for. Of course, at first the horse did not come with manuals. The early partnerships between people and horses were improvisations of breath and bruises. Learning to fall off was as essential as learning to kick. The first great transformation, the domestication of the horse, produced no fanfare, only slow habituation. Humans discovered ways to bind a bit in a horse's mouth, to balance weight across withers and hide, to invent saddles. These were small, practical things with enormous geopolitical consequences. A bit in the mouth is a minor cruelty, until that cruelty means your horse obeys in the middle of a charge. Suddenly, the line between chaos and victory is measured in iron rings and rope knots. Once mounted archery became reliable, everything changed. Imagine shooting an arrow while keeping pace with a fleeing caravan. Practice teaches contempt for distance. Contempt invents tactics. The steppe archers could parade before an opposing phalanx, pepper it with arrows, retreat, and return like a tide. From proximity came innovations, feigned retreats, encirclements, the theatrical cruelty of a staged withdrawal. Military manuals would later call some of these techniques strategic, but on the steppe they evolved because of a simpler thing: hunger versus opportunity, where speed let you choose which to prioritize. The trick about mobility is that it scales. A family's single horse makes the family more secure. A tribe's herd becomes an economy. A confederation of horse-mounted peoples becomes a political force that can threaten cities whose inhabitants believe walls are destiny. Once you can move men quickly across space, the logic of simple raiding mutates into governance. It's an ugly, practical metamorphosis. You raid, you take spoils, you discover spoils need distribution, and suddenly you are back at camp creating ranks and accounting practices to decide who gets what. Thus were bureaucracies born, out of looting and the awkward necessity of dividing plunder without starting civil wars at the fire. This is where the great steppe polities begin to look like accidental empires. Take the Sarmatians and Scythians, savage to the settled world's aesthetic sensibilities but sophisticated about horses, armor, and social ritual. They wore their ferocity like jewelry, braided beards, tattoos, animal motifs, and they knew how to translate a successful raid into political capital. A young leader who brought back wealth could pay off allies, buy loyalty, and establish a reputation that outlived his mortal body. Myths inflated, songs became law. Soon enough, the band of riders calling themselves by a clan name had the architecture of rule. Titles, marriage alliances, and a culturally enforced memory of who had owned which pastures last winter. The Huns arrived like a rumor, and proceeded to become a problem for any European politician who assumed geography would be honored by history. They were less a single nation than a cloud of horsemen who could condense into a terrifying storm. Their terror taught Europe the existential price of ignoring mobility. A court that has never had to plan for mounted raids is one that will learn the lesson through fire, and the very modern concept of refugee movement. The Hunnic effect on Europe is the historical equivalent of a wake-up call, scribbled in shortage and soot: reform or be razed. Not all nomads were simply brigands. The Gökturks, the Khazars, the various Turkic polities fashioned utopias of movement, constellations of trade and diplomacy built on horseback. They controlled trade routes, exacted tariffs, and brokered marriages. A rider could be a merchant and an envoy. Horse and saddle made diplomacy faster and less formal. Consider the contrast. A sedentary kingdom would send an envoy with a retinue full of ceremony and fatigue. A nomadic polity sent a rider who arrived with news, demanded tribute, and left before the ink dried. The horse is a very efficient mailman if your message is accompanied by a lance. Then came the Mongols, who are the case study historians love to use when explaining how mobility plus organization plus a terrible temperament equals global impact. The Mongols did not invent mounted warfare, but they perfected it into something bureaucratic. They had relays, posts where fresh horses waited, so that envoys and raiding parties could sustain momentum. They combined tactical speed with strategic patience. A feigned retreat becomes a trap when every rider knows his position and the timing is precise. They also developed surprisingly modern systems of taxation, relay posts, and law codes, shocking to the urbane mind that expected barbarians to be capricious and poetic. The truth is messier. The Mongols were administrative scientists whose laboratory was the mounted warband. What the horse did to politics is equal parts democratizing and aristocratic. On one hand, horses spread opportunity across a broader base. More men could gain status by proving skill on horseback than by inheriting a ceremonial chair. On the other hand, horses amplified inequalities. Wealthier groups could maintain larger herds and thus field more riders, which meant more raiding power and more resources captured. Meritocracy under the saddle meant bloody competition. It was an economy that rewarded skill and brutality in roughly equal measure. The horse made leadership both more performative and more precarious. Economically, the horse transformed exchange networks, moved goods faster, and you can control longer distance trade. The Silk Road did not belong to sedentary merchants alone. Nomads contested, taxed, and protected it. Horseback control meant control over what people ate and wore in cities far away. Empires rose by virtue of their ability to command routes. A single mounted patrol could ransom a caravan or protect it, both profitable enterprises. The horse turned puddle-ridden supply chains into flexible arteries. It made the world smaller by shrinking distances and paradoxically made it more complex by saturating it with competing nodes of power. But let's not dress this in the romantic wrappings of inevitability. Horses are stubborn collaborators. They introduce problems as well as solutions. Herding demands land. Land invites conflict. Pasture rights could be as complicated as any maritime boundary, because the steppe's fertility is seasonal and fickle. When droughts or overgrazing hit, people and horses migrated. Migration is a politically unstable action when your neighbor has an invested interest in the land you plan to pass through. So armies of horses often force sedentary peoples into a reactive posture, and reactions escalate. Now you have cycles of raiding and defense that feed into new institutions. Fortresses, walls, standing armies, taxes to pay for those standing armies. The horse, having offered mobility, also birthed complex systems to constrain it. And hardship was not merely strategic, it was bodily. Being a mounted soldier meant sleeping in a cold that made your bones complain, feeding horses when grass was scarce, and patching leather with hope. Survival on the steppe is a curriculum of small cruelties. Kids learn to lead foals and learn the anatomy of pain. The romantic image of the rider bathing in glory hides the fact that most of their days involved tending to hooves, washing mud from tack, and arguing about who had rights to a stream. The horse amplifies human will, but it also amplifies human vulnerability. A broken leg on a steppe side is a sentence of obsolescence. Your horse is less forgiving than a mother. Yet adversity breeds cultural intimacy. The horse bed became a poetic subject. Songs, tales, and mourning rituals grew around these animals. Some cultures even placed their best steeds in graves, a final assertion that movement mattered in both life and afterlife. This fetishization was not mere sentimentality, but a structural acknowledgement. If your economy runs on hooves, then your cosmology will include hooves. Religion adapted to mobility. Gods who had once been associated with the earth now wore bridles and demanded sacrifices of a more aerodynamic nature. It is easy to shield a story of horses with images of glorious battles and sweeping conquests, but empire building is mundane. After victory comes administration, feeding troops, policing trade, adjudicating disputes, and collecting tribute. The mounted conqueror soon learns that governance is a different skill from raiding. Some conquerors developed systems to convert horse-mounted supremacy into lasting order. They established relay stations, legal codes, postal systems, and even taxation systems that were sometimes more effective than sedentary ones because they were oddly tailored to mobility. The irony is wonderful. The man who once stole grain to feed his riders becomes the man who employs clerks to write receipts for the same grain. Of course, any technological advantage invites imitation. Sedentary societies adapted. They learned to build better fortifications and to recruit cavalry of their own. Horses spread into elite armies, and soon every kingdom that wanted to play the game had to field its own mounted forces, to train archers who could ride and shoot, to develop stirrups, and to sometimes grudgingly accept that the horse wasn't only a thing for the steppe. The stage was set for a global rebalancing. The horse internationalized war, trade, and the movement of peoples. There is a comic cruelty to this process. At every stage, animals and humans conspire toward higher stakes. A tribe that invented an effective tactic never got to keep that advantage long. Within a generation, the neighbors copy it, and the original innovators either expand or become obsolete. The steppe ethic is Darwinian in rhetoric and bureaucratic in practice. Adapt or be absorbed. Empires rose not merely because of clever generals, but because a social web could incorporate and redistribute the spoils of success. Horses catalyze both expansion and institutional resilience, and when combined with human inventiveness, saddles, bits, relay posts, the results were inevitable and brutal. So when we ask, how did horses turn nomads into empires? The answer is less one dramatic moment and more a long conspiracy between biology and human will. Horses offered capacity, speed, strength, stamina, while nomads offered social forms capable of using that capacity ruthlessly and resourcefully. Together, they invented a new political geometry, borders that were porous, states that were mobile, and empires that could be assembled on the hoof. But the horse did something else, smaller and more human. It changed people's relationship with risk. A rider could gamble on a raid. He could bet resources and reputations with quickness. The horse made risk manageable at a scale the settled world did not anticipate. The more risks nomads took and survived, the more their leaders could centralize power. The horse is a technology of leverage, and where there is leverage, there is a chance to build empires that look both accidental and systematic. And now, as you sit and imagine these windswept scenes, tents snapping like old flags or horses stamping, children squinting into a horizon of dust, tell me, which of these horse-born empires would you have rather served? The one that taxed cleverly, the one that raided across borders, or the one that wrote the first postal codes? Drop a comment below and pick a side. If you think the horse deserved better credit, or worse punishment, write it down. I will read it and probably smirk. This is only the opening gambit. We've traced the first awkward entanglement of humans and horses, domestication, mobility, the birth of mounted warfare, and the slow bureaucratization of brute speed. In the next part, we'll ride deeper into the particular nightmares, the Scythian feast and funeral rites, the Hunnic migrations that rewrote European politics, the terrifying practicality of Mongol relay stations, and we'll watch how a few tactical innovations on horseback rewired entire economies and belief systems. Stay tuned. The ground gets colder, the stakes get higher, and the horses apparently develop opinions about honor. Imagine a funeral feast so loud the horses startle and a buried prince wakes up to find his best mare already dead by protocol. 15 seconds. Imagine armies that could eat a kingdom for breakfast and then politely deliver the receipts. If that doesn't make you curious, scroll to the comments and tell me why you're allergic to glorious chaos. By now, we've warmed up. Domestication, stirrups, raids that feel like impulsive art projects. Now we go in for the messy, nitty-gritty hour. The rituals, the logistics, the petty cruelties that make history stick to your ribs. The horse didn't just carry bodies, it carried meaning. It carried a culture of death and celebration that would make a modern bureaucrat uncomfortable and a poet suspicious. Start with a feast. The Scythians, those tasseled mystics of the steppe, who treated victory and mourning like twin sports. Imagine a banquet where every platter is an argument and every goblet is a memory. They wore the skins of beasts they had outwitted. They tattooed their bodies with lines that read like warnings. After a successful raid, cups clinked and songs were sung about who'd taken which head. When a noble died, the funeral was designed not to stifle grief, but to convert it into spectacle. Horses, the centerpieces, were sometimes sacrificed, laid to rest alongside their master, because what use was a good steed in an afterlife with bad pasture? That practice is grotesque if you come from a world where land is allotted by paperwork. In the steppe, it made cosmic sense. Mobility matters after death too. This tendency toward theatrical death was not mere savagery. It's mythic bookkeeping. A leader had to die, leaving a story clean enough to be retold. The horse in the grave was a literal guarantee that the narrative carried on. Your best mare would fetch you across the next world's plains. There is a ridiculous honesty in that. Some cultures bury libraries. The Scythians buried horsepower. Now zoom to logistics, uglier, less poetic, and infinitely more decisive. Empires slide on grease and grain. War is often less about valor than about who can feed which horses and when. The Mongols understood that starvation is not purely metaphysical. They made speed a repeatable process, swap tired mounts for fresh ones, keep the chain of riders unbroken, send messages across a continent with shockingly little fuss. To move an army quickly, you need horses, and to keep horses, you need pastures. Those pastures have seasons. That seasonality is merciless. Imagine a relay post, a no-frills human chain where each man hands off a message like a baton. At one moment, you have scouts. Minutes later, you have a taxation demand. Later still, you have a sack of stolen grain that needs a receipt and a digestive plan. These relay networks were the medieval equivalent of a delivery app, except with more dust and fewer customer service reps. Riders traveled far on borrowed speed. The administrative mind behind that speed was not noble in the romantic sense. It was efficient and cold. You couldn't be sentimental about fodder if you intended to conquer the morning. This efficiency translated into a weirdly modern bureaucracy. The conqueror who could not turn raids into stable revenue streams would be gone in a season or 3. So rulers codified. They wrote laws that mattered because they needed cooperators, traders, caravan guards, local governors, who would prefer a predictable extraction to random violence. Surprisingly, nomads could be very boring managers when it served them. Give a man 50 horses, a few scribes, and a taste for regular income, and he will invent a ledger by dusk. Then there's the skill everyone talks about because it's cinematic: mounted archery. Picture writers leaning back and launching arrows with the kind of calm that'd be unnerving in a dentist. Mounted archery is a ballet of physics and pain, balancing on a living, breathing machine while trying to hit a target that likely wants to kill you. Training starts early. Children grow up aiming while swinging on saddles, while adults gauge the wind by how it ruffles a horse's flank. The step: people learn to turn recoil into rhythm. The horse does not merely amplify speed, it amplifies timing. An arrow in the right place at the right moment is a tiny explanation for a big victory. Mounted archery also rewired tactics. There's the famous feigned retreat, the art of pretending to lose so the enemy follows into a trap. It is a lie that works because the horse affords you speed and the discipline to stop when the moment is right. You can teach soldiers to fake panic. You cannot easily teach them to then regroup with the coldness of a clockmaker. That discipline of retreat and return was a social achievement as much as a military one. It required charismatic leaders who could make cowardice honorable and bravery systematic. It made mythology out of practical cunning. Speaking of leaders, they had to be more than skilled riders. They had to be charismatic administrators, or at least charismatic enough to get others to pretend their administration was stable. Genghis Khan is the poster child, not because he invented everything, but because he combined ruthless spectacle with talent for organization. He demanded loyalty, but he also offered law. The Yasa, yes, the legend of stone-cold justice, functioned less like divine revelation and more like a social contract with teeth. You might be able to explain why a certain tax made sense to a city official. You could less easily argue with an army that had been trained to ride like the wind and die like an anecdote. The horse gave leaders leverage. The leaders gave the horse purpose. We must not, however, fall into the trap of glorifying conquest without admitting its human cost. The steppes' mobility was a boon for some and a nightmare for many. Sedentary societies faced trauma that was not only physical but existential. Imagine waking in the night to hear hooves and knowing those sounds are the beginning of a new political demographic. Towns were sacked, families relocated, new elites rose on the back of older ones like opportunistic ivy. The social fabric of many regions was rewoven violently, and the threads were not always pretty. Sometimes the transformations were less violent but more disorienting. Nomadic polities often acted as brokers for trade, which meant cities that had been self-contained economies suddenly found themselves in a system where a rider could show up and demand a toll for passage. This was both a curse and a blessing. The bargain was crude: pay for protection or be plundered. Yet this crude market forced interactions and economic innovations, caravanserais, market regulations, protection payments that eventually looked suspiciously like taxes. A horse could thus become a revenue tool. Somebody had to collect the coin. That somebody needed a ledger, and that ledger needed scribes. Thus, a new layer of civilization crept into the dust. Also, the horse played a role in gender and social mobility. On the steppe, horsemanship created niches that were sometimes less patriarchal than you'd expect. Women rode, fought, and managed herds. They could inherit status through skill as well as blood. The image of the empress on horseback is not a romantic aside. It's a social fact in several nomadic cultures. That fluidity in gender roles was practical. Survival requires every hand and every eye. Horses, by making speed and skill valuable, allowed merit to trump birth occasionally. That shift sounds progressive until you remember that merit was measured in how quickly and brutally you could raid or negotiate. If there's a theme to all this, it's tension between mobility and control, between poetic ritual and accounting ledgers, between the desperate beauty of a nomad's life and the bureaucratic dullness that made empires last. The horse exacerbated contradictions and then gave their owners the tools to manage them. It's a structural irony. The same animal that allowed raids to succeed also made long-term governance possible. Now, the inevitable question: how did sedentary polities respond? They built walls, sure, and they learned how to recruit cavalry of their own. The Byzantines, Persians, Chinese, each adapted to the steppe in its own way, sometimes marrying nomads, sometimes buying peace, sometimes fighting until exhaustion forced negotiation. Technology traveled both directions. Stirrups, for example, may have refined cavalry tactics in states far from the steppe. Siege engines improved too. It's a dizzying exchange. The nomads gave mobility, the sedentary gave siegecraft and permanence. The result, hybrid empires that looked like compromise rather than conquest. One of history's most deliciously cruel outcomes. The horse made possible empires that then used those horses to enforce laws that made horse owning more expensive. Think levies and taxes designed to keep a mounted force funded. An empire that wins by mobility soon needs to immobilize resources on paper. It's a modern paradox. Freedom of movement demands paperwork. Ride fast enough and you'll need a clerk to record what you stole. Don't forget the climate, the invisible partner in this relationship. Droughts, unseasonal snows, terrible summers. Each could shrink pastures and expand conflict. Horses are not just instruments of war. They are weather-sensitive living machines. When the weather turned, migration patterns changed and whole social ecosystems were forced into new arrangements. The horses make history by obeying seasons. A dry year is a historian with a cruel sense of timing. At the social level, this created cycles of adaptation. Regions would experience waves, migration, settlement, acculturation, and then the wheel would spin again. People who once raided might settle. Settled folk might take to riding. Languages mixed, laws were borrowed, cuisine hybridized in surprising ways. The steppe left spices in urban pantries and cities returned metalwork and storage techniques. Civilization is often a messy mutual theft, and the horse was the courier. Let's return to the human scale for a moment. Riding is intimacy. The relationship between rider and horse is tactile, animal, and sometimes brutal. Hoof care, feeding, the endless conversation of touch, this intimate labor-built culture, stories of loyalty, of riders who chose death over abandoning a sick horse, are common. That loyalty was reciprocal in a way. A horse with a good rider is a political asset. We owe a lot of empires to that mute pact between flesh and fur. Here's a small, ugly joke history loves. Empires made of mobility often end up making maps. To extract tribute efficiently, you need boundaries. To guarantee loyalty, you need offices. To move troops, you need roads. The horse thus becomes a cartographer. It makes borders legible. And when borders are legible, bureaucracy has an easier time. The horse's hoof print becomes a line on a map. This is the kind of irony that a good historian will say with a sigh and a smirk. Which brings us to my favorite truth. The horse turns chaos into repeatable habit. Raids were improvisational at first. Soon they became protocols. Rituals of gift-giving after a raid. The sequence of plunder distribution, rules of marriage between tribes. These are administrative fixes for violent spontaneity. The steppe produced rule books to regulate lawless behavior, because without rules, the benefits of mobility are short-lived. If everyone raids without constraint, everyone ends up ruined. Thus, etiquette is born from appetite. By now, you might be asking, which part of this would I willingly experience? The cold nights with a horse's company, the thrill of an arrow finding its mark, the petty gratification of a successful toll levied on a caravan? I will not embarrass you with moralizing. Instead, I will invite you to confess in the comments. Which role would you pick? Nomad, bureaucratic conqueror, besieged city dweller, or the unlucky clerk forced to count horses' teeth at dawn? Tell me below, and I'll rank your courage with mild contempt. This part of the story, rituals, logistics, law, and compassion wrapped in mud, ends where all good histories pause, at an uncomfortable hinge. The horse had already remade law, made logistics theatrical, and forced gender roles into new shapes. In the next portion, we will track specific dominoes, how a handful of tactical innovations toppled empires, how postal systems became instruments of terror and efficiency, and how the sentimental bond between rider and steed turned into state policy. Spoiler, it involves more graves, more ledgers, and a funeral where a horse might very well outlive its owner's reputation. If you're enjoying this descent into historical absurdity and survival's pain, hit the comments and pick which absurd ritual you'd like me to describe next. Would you rather hear about a siege improvised by horse-led engineers, a wedding that doubled as a treaty, or a famine that rewired an empire's tax code? Vote now. Your choice will determine which human misery I describe next. Imagine a courier who outruns boredom and empires, stamping a seal so hard that cities rearrange their tax codes. 15 seconds. Imagine a composite bow whispering through the wind while a horse laughs in the language of hooves. If you still scroll, tell me in the comments which collapse you'd prefer, a siege of cheese or a raid of bureaucracy. By now, we've seen the horse turn nomads into administrators and blade wielders into ledger writers. In this part, we watch the small inventions, the stirrup, the composite bow, the relay post, the siege trick, that act like dominoes. One knock and whole civilizations rearrange themselves around a new practical truth. These are not abstract changes, they are visceral, immediate, and petty as debt collectors. They are the sort of innovations that make a neighbor adopt a different hat or a city remap its gates. So we will follow 3 strands: battlefield tricks that multiply terror, postal and relay systems that turn speed into governance, and how sentiment for a beast becomes policy about breeding, fodder, and funerals. Expect cold efficiency, ritualized cruelty, and administrative improvisations that would make any modern clerk feel emotionally manipulated. First, the tactical dominoes. We tend to fetishize generals and heroism, but the mechanics of a saddle's tree or a bow's curvature are where empires are actually born. Consider the stirrup. To call it merely a comfort device is to underpay for its geopolitical dividend. With stirrups, you stop clinging to a horse and start standing with it. You can deliver heavier blows. You can absorb recoil when firing a heavy arrow or colliding with a shield. And you can stay mounted in circumstances that would previously have ended in a humiliating, bone-bruising fall. The stirrup gives participation the steadiness of an invoice. Suddenly more men can be effective cavalry. The result is a multiplication of threat. An elite becomes a class worth organizing taxes to support. The stirrup is quiet, mechanical, and murderous in how it restructures manpower. Then the composite bow, a compact, violent instrument of geometry. Layers of horn, sinew, and wood glued with patience create a bow that stores enormous energy in a small frame. A perfect fit for a rider who does not want to fling away his weapon when the horse is moving fast. Mounted archers could let loose volleys from a distance that would render many a pike square's entire tactical plan obsolete. The composite bow rewired the calculus of defense. Walls and tightly packed formations, which had once been the bulwark of empires, suddenly looked like fine mesh to be peppered relentlessly. The tactical genius is in the sustained harassment. Wear the enemy down at a distance with limit-testing arrows, and only engage decisively when the morale accounting favors you. Feigned retreat, oh the delicious moral geometry of it. Pretend to flee, let the enemy break formation in triumph, then wheel and harvest the exposed arrogance. That tactic might sound theatrical, but it is a disciplined machine. You need riders who can pretend panic with the timing of actors and then regroup like accountants. It's comparable to a con man who can cry on cue and then demand receipts. The effectiveness of such tactics depends not just on speed, but on command doctrine. Orders that tell warriors, run now, turn now, do not panic for real. That discipline, achieved through calendars of training and the threat of dishonor, is what converts a mob into a military instrument. Combine these tactical elements and you get compound effects. A people who could fire the composite bow from stirrups, perform feigned retreats, and maintain discipline would make a pike square look like a social gathering gone wrong. Those tactics topple armies, and with armies topple regimes. But tactics alone do not create empire. The Mongols, for instance, paired mobility with systems, relay posts, taxation models, and a state ideology that extracted benefit from continuity. That leads us to the second strand, postal systems and relay networks, the infrastructure that turns terror into rule. Imagine a continent-spanning network of stations where a rider hands off a sealed message and a fresh mount, then collapses into a bowl of some soup. Repeat this 100 times and you can move intelligence faster than rumor, and tax demands faster than revolt. The Mongol yam is the archetypal example. That system of mounted couriers and relay stations gave their khans strategic headaches solved in speed, quickly learned news of rebellions, rapid diplomatic demands, and a logistical backbone that allowed invasion to be not merely a raid, but a prolonged campaign. A postal system makes governance nimble. It lets a ruler respawn, punish, reward, and reassign with a tempo that unsettles opponents who judge time by solar calendars rather than by a rider's gallop. But postal systems aren't neutral. They're instruments of power that demand maintenance. Relay posts require food, fodder, personnel, and security. You cannot have yam stations without quotas for grain and grazing land. That demand is an administrative hook. Suddenly, a region must either provide for these posts or pay to be exempt. The courier becomes an excuse for taxation. The horse that ferries messages also ferries the right to collect for its upkeep. And when the courier carries orders to kill, the system becomes even more menacing. Speed becomes a bureaucratic lever. The faster your orders can reach the frontier, the more effective your central control. In that way, the relay system turns movement into a predictable mechanism of extraction. Here's a human vignette. A remote governor receives, in 3 days instead of 3 months, an imperial seal demanding an extra supply of oats for the yam posts. He has 3 choices: requisition locally and anger merchants, buy from a distant market and siphon funds, or raise levies and risk insurrection. Each choice spirals into administration. The courier doesn't just deliver a message, it delivers a policy problem. That problem births clerks who count oats in horses' teeth, and clerks begat ledgers which begat courts. Civilization multiplies in response to delivery speed. Speed also transforms diplomacy. A rider appearing with a sealed demand or tribute is less likely to be negotiated with in leisurely terms. The messenger's speed is itself a threat. Show up quickly, and the recipient knows the sender can act fast on unwillingness. That leverage shapes treaties, marriage alliances, and trade deals. It reduces conversation time and converts negotiation into a series of urgent choices. The horse thus compresses diplomacy into cliff-hanging micro-decisions. The state that controls the fastest couriers can govern more effectively because it can force decisions before local actors develop alternative coalitions. The third strand is the slow corruption of sentiment into policy, where feelings about horses harden into state regulations about breeding, fodder, funerals, and military recruitment. At first, the bond between rider and horse is intimate. Soldiers sing lullabies to mares, mourn a fallen steed, and sometimes choose death over abandoning a companion. But sentiment becomes expensive at scale. When an army becomes an empire, sentiment must submit to logistics. That process is impolite and even sacred. You have to decide whether a favored stallion gets buried with honors, or whether its meat is requisitioned to feed the caravan. The state's hand is not always cruel, it's often pragmatic. Consider breeding policy. An empire that needs war horses cannot rely on whimsical gifts. It must cultivate bloodlines, create stud programs, and control grazing. That is early state planning. Forage becomes a strategic resource, breeders become quasi-officials, and laws appear regulating the sale and export of young colts. When a horse is a unit of war, its reproduction is as political as any census. Priests might complain that a breeder is defiling customs. Merchants might grumble about tariffs on stallions. But armies have names for such annoyances: supplies. Funerary policy is another point of interest. The cultural practice of burying horses with elite dead is a ritual that signals mobility matters after death too. At state scale, however, funerary horse burials become expensive and sometimes suspicious. An empire might restrict the practice to royal families to prevent mass slaughter disguised as piety, or it might substitute symbolic horse effigies when resources are scarce. That substitution signals a transformation from an economy where private sacrifice is affordable to one where public optics and resource accounting are enforced. It's a ledger-driven spirituality. We must also talk about the dark calculus of fodder and its administrative mutations. Horses eat. They eat a lot. An army on the move consumes the landscape unless someone organizes the rationing. Empire building requires predictable supply lines. Thus, commissars, quartermasters, and forage officers appear. They collect reports of grass availability, they plan routes to maximize grazing, and they decide when a cavalry unit must dismount and become an infantry of necessity. The horse's appetite informs strategy. A dry season might force a halt to campaigns, or even provoke migration. Thus, climate instantly becomes a foreign policy variable. This is where tragedy often enters. The same horse that makes an empire possible can be its undoing if pastures fail. One dry year and the yam posts are underfed, riders slow, messages lag, decision-making falters, courts miscalculate, revolts occur. The horse is the empire's Achilles heel because it is living, temperamental, and season-bound. An administrative machinery can smooth over small deficits but not catastrophic environmental shifts. Deaths of horses multiply as deaths of political will. There is a bureaucratic comedy here too. As cavalry becomes indispensable, empires invent ways to tax horses, tithe on breeding, penalties for unregistered mounts, forced contributions of colts during wartime. The state becomes a horse-eating bureaucracy in reverse. It feeds on horses' productivity. Sometimes officials abuse this for petty gain, confiscating the best mares under pretenses, selling rations in black markets, forging receipts. The horse thus invites corruption, and corruption invites reform. Empires bend and mend under the strain of keeping hooves moving. Now the human stories, because without them all, the policies are cold outlines. Picture a frontier town where a yam rider arrives with news of a siege. The town must decide whether to open gates, burn stores, or flee. The decision is made in a day. It used to take a month. Rapid decisions mean rapid moral hemorrhage. Families split between those who believe in resistance and those who prefer negotiation. The rider who brought the news did nothing more than change the tempo, yet the tempo rearranges loyalties. People who thrive on long deliberation are outcompeted by those who can act now. The horse thus imposes a cultural preference for immediacy. Or imagine a wedding arranged to solidify an alliance between a sedentary city and a nomadic clan. The groom rides in with horses as bride price. The bride's family accepts, but the political subtext is that horses are currency that also encode military obligation. A marriage becomes a micro-contract of cavalry recruitment. Groom's clan promises a levy of riders if the city's defenses are threatened. The vigor of this contract is enforced by speed. If the bridegroom's clan can show up quickly with riders, the city knows the bargain was real. Weddings begin to function like recruitment centers. Culture and military logistics overlap until they are indistinguishable. Finally, consider the spectacle of burial and memory. A hero's horse buried alongside him becomes a public statement. The state honors mobility and transforms a private bond into public myth. Children learn that loyalty to a steed is tantamount to loyalty to the realm. Over generations, the stories ossify into public ritual. Memorials, festivals, and a certain rough nostalgia for free gallops that never existed in the lived reality of rationed fodder and overseen pastures. Memory is co-opted to justify current policies. The horse is the symbol and the scapegoat. So what do these dominoes add up to? They add up to a paradoxical truth. Mobility births permanence. An animal that made life transient also motivated practices that stabilized power. Laws, postal systems, breeding registries, and funerary protocols. Speed demands predictability. Predictability demands bureaucracy. The same hooves that carried raiders also carried tax collectors and clerks. The horse is both agent and artifact of institutionalization. If you're here for the violent and the administrative, tell me below. Which domino would you dismantle first? The stirrup to make cavalry clumsier, the relay post to slow rulers down, or the breeding registry to keep armies unstocked? Vote in the comments and I will respond with mild scorn. If you want to hear the humiliating tale of a siege improvised by horse-led engineers, say the word. If you prefer a funeral where the horse outlives a dynasty, shout it out. Your comments will decide which human sorrow I narrate next, because history, like a good cavalry charge, moves better when someone else shouts the order. Imagine your tax collector arriving on a horse that has seen 3 empires fall and still looks smug about the ledger. 15 seconds. Imagine that horse stamping the page and demanding a receipt for your surrender. If that doesn't make you laugh with dread, tell me in the comments which empire you'd rather owe money to. By now, the horses have done their job, invented mobility, made raiding elegant, taught poets to rhyme with hooves, and persuaded clerks to invent the past tense of requisition. This final part should feel like watching the end credits while the projector burns, grand, smudged, and smelling faintly of horsehair. We'll ride through the collapse and consolidation of horse-born empires, the strange afterlives they left in law and landscape, and a couple of human-scale catastrophes so petty and tragic they could only have been catalyzed by hooves and bureaucracy. Expect funeral rites, sieges with improvised engineers, the implosion of supply lines, and the final joke. The horse that outlives dynasties and gets a better epitaph. Start with collapse because it's where the narrative tension finally pays off. Empires that rise on speed can be breathtaking in their ascendancy and comically fragile in their decline. Speed concentrates risk. The same system that allows a ruler to dispatch orders across a continent also concentrates blame. When the weather fails, when pastures vanish, when a disease sweeps through horse stables, the whole apparatus reveals its Achilles heel. A polity that depends on relay posts, breeders, and fodder has given up a lot of redundancy for tempo. Redundancy is ugly, messy, and boring. Trouble only notices speed. When the yam slows, when riders stumble and messages arrive late, decisions that once seemed obvious become catastrophic. Consider the archetypal winter that breaks a horse empire. Snow falls like a tax inspector with terrible timing. Pastures hide beneath ice, waterers freeze, foals die. An army that expected to live off the land finds itself hungry, muddy, and numerically modest. The central court demands answers. Provincial governors send excuses. Brigands smell weakness and become inventive. Revolts bloom because the calculus of obedience, how much tribute is worth continued survival, suddenly tilts the other way. The chain that once transmitted orders now transmits panic. In short order, you have peasants who once paid tithes instead burning the ledgers that named them, and marauders who use the same horses that built the empire to tear it apart. The humor is black and interpersonal. The very beasts that made empire possible are the animals that chew it to ruin. Collapse isn't always climatic. Sometimes empires dissolve like poorly made saddles. Seams come undone at the edges, small irritations accumulate, and then one official's pettiness becomes history. Imagine a clerk in a provincial capital who decides to claim a few extra mares on paper for emergency use. The central office signs, a minor skirmish takes those horses, a minor leader feels betrayed, alliances shift. Within a decade, that petty corruption has cascaded into a civil war, because every minor actor acts like their personal ledger is existential. The horse bureaucracy is conveniently fragile. It magnifies both the grand and the trivial into political outcomes. Paperwork plus hooves equals chaotic arithmetic. Next, the afterlife. What horses and their empires leave behind. Empires made roads to move riders. They planted orchards to feed horses. They wrote laws about ownership, inheritance, and even naming colts. All these things outlive the roar of conquests. A dynasty falls, but the roads remain useful. A postal route becomes a trade artery. A stud registry is repurposed by subsequent rulers who find breeding records useful for taxation and propaganda. The relics of horsemanship become tools of governance the next regime happily adopts. It's an absurd continuity. The conqueror who once smashed a capital now has heirs who tax it with the same efficiency that once enabled the raising. The horse's imprint is conservative in a way. It stabilizes the chaos it birthed by creating institutions that survive long after banners rot. That leads us to the curious paradox that mobility creates permanence. How? Because to exploit speed at scale, you need predictability, supply lines, relay posts, legal standards for levies, and designated pastures. The infrastructure of speed is an architecture of permanence. Think of it as a predator becoming a landlord. The conquerors who once lived in tents now need offices. They erect them with the same materials they once used for siege works. Tents become state buildings. Horsehair rugs become symbols of authority in halls with stone floors, and the young warriors who once slept under stars become the clerks who stamp forms at dawn. The transformation is both comedic and tragic. The people who had once derided paperwork end up endorsing it because the paperwork keeps their power intact. I promised a siege improvised by horse-led engineers, and here it is. Not all creativity in war involves delicate instruments. Sometimes it involves desperate improvisation. Imagine a city that has built a line of defense precisely because it believed riffraff came only with pickaxes and battering rams. A nomadic army approaches with more audacity than equipment and decides it has precisely two realistic options: wait for winter and hope the city yields to famine, boring, or build siege machines from what the steppe offers, inventive. The engineers, if we can call them that, are cavalrymen who are good at fixing harnesses and patching chariots. They begin to build mobile trebuchets mounted on horse-drawn platforms. The idea is horrifyingly simple. Deliver a projectile while staying out of the city's archers' lines. They lash logs into frames, swing counterweights with teams of horses, and adapt local leather for sling straps. The city's walls have not seen this kind of improvisation because their architects were trained to expect timber from forests, not a rolling horse-powered foundry. The first night the siege engines fire, the city's defenders laugh, until the ballistae start toppling towers with a precision that suggests conspiracies between blacksmiths and patients. The attackers act like a swarm of beavers with an engineering degree. They feed their contraptions with horse muscle and cunning. Each machine requires fodder, though, and that becomes the siege's logistical joke. The attackers who had imaginatively created mobile engines now find themselves spending half their time hauling oats. The equation becomes existential. Move fast enough to break the wall before your horses starve, or feed the horses and watch the siege drag into seasons. This gauntlet often ends with a bargain. The city buys off the besiegers with grain and recruits, turning a siege into a negotiation rather than a simple sack. The siege's real innovation, horse-driven engineering, becomes an argument for how economics always wins over raw bravery. Now the funeral where a horse outlives a dynasty, a vignette both grotesque and tender. In a capital where the dynasty's shrines grow ivy and cracks, the royal mausoleum remains pristine because the horses buried with kings took the funerary budget literally. Lots of fodder, rituals, and tomb maintenance. A late emperor, staging his last impressive gesture, orders that his favorite mare be interred with him, complete with a carved saddle and a small carved stable. The tomb becomes a pilgrimage for nostalgic riders who whisper to the horse's carved nostrils as if seeking covenant. Decades later, the dynasty has collapsed. Banners rot. The throne is a chair that leaks, but the tomb of the mare persists because cows graze the meadows and the locals respect stable stones. Outsiders joke that the horse has outlasted 3 kings and a tax code. The mare acquires a mythic status. Peasants swear she was the one who pushed the last king to make an unjust peace because she tossed her head during a council. Over time, the tomb becomes a shrine to mobility. People attach tokens to the stable door, and a new cult forms around the mare's imagined agency. The horse's epitaph reads in a local tongue, something like, "She ran faster than loyalties." It's a sly monument to how animals and bureaucratic acts conspire in memory. Let's not sentimentalize this completely. The animal's afterlife and ritual often masks environmental destruction. Herds need grass. To maintain ceremonial studs for state cavalry, pastures are carved out of forests and drained wetlands. The same state that writes poetry about horses sometimes erases ecosystems to feed them. Histories of horse empires, when you strip their glamorous chroniclers, reveal landscapes remade for hooves. Tree lines recede, springs are diverted, and regional biodiversity is sacrificed to keep the cavalry moving. The paradox is telling. Mobility, celebrated in poems, often requires immobilizing parts of nature in permanent service. Where did all this lead? To maps that insisted on lines where previously there were none. To post roads that became trade roads. To laws that treated horses as household capital. To cultures that enclosed pastures and formalized grazing rights. To funerary rituals that turned horses into saints, to bureaucracies with departments whose sole job was to count muck and measure oats. Empires may fall, dynasties may crumble, but the institutional fossils persist. The future borrows the horse's paperwork long after it's abandoned the horse's banners. And yet, for all this institutionalization, the horse's basic truth remains stubbornly animal and indifferent. It needed a mouthful of hay, a clean hoof, and a human who knew how to lie still while the world rearranged. The romance is that the most mechanical impulses, tax collection, relay posts, breeding registries, arose from the humble need to feed an animal. The tragic irony is that empires that thought themselves immortal because they mastered mobility were often undone by the messy biological fact of digestion. So here we are, at the end of the gallop. The horse taught nomads to count, to write, and to inventory grief. It taught empires to move swift and live long only by accepting tediously mundane obligations. It shaped trade, diplomacy, law, and lyric poetry. It is the reason some regions kept watchtowers and why other regions wrote songs about mares that smelled like storms. The final image is simple and stubborn. A child runs barefoot over a ruined gate, past a half-rotted banner to the stable where an old mare stands eating the last available grass. She will not carry him to empire, but she knows the rhythm of hooves and history and will teach him to tie a knot properly. That knot is civilization, humble, practical, and absurdly persistent. Before I go, a parting engagement. Tell me in the comments which absurd ritual you'd like dramatized next. A coronation where the king must prove his horsemanship by assembling a postal relay. A famine court where nobles argue over oat distribution, like soap opera villains, or a love story where two riders negotiate peace by swapping favorite stallions. Vote below. Pick one and I'll narrate it with the same fond cruelty. If you've ridden with me through these 4 parts, congratulations. You've learned how hooves make history messy, how speed demands paperwork, and why the horse deserves both a statue and a receipt. Drop a comment, pick your favorite disaster, and don't forget to tell me which empire you'd honestly prefer living under. I'll rate your courage, your cynicism, and your taste in taxes.